What's a move?
A move. What's a move?
You can't call me a move.
I can't?
No.
I give you a move. Hey, it's a move.
Okay, here we are on our second episode. I shouldn't even bother keeping on counting them, but we're on to another episode, ladies and gentlemen, of our Halloween sequence, Spooky.
Numero dos.
Yeah, we need to say some Halloween-y kind of things to get people in the spirit, right? Oliver and I are sitting here, by the way, obviously you can't see us. We're sitting here, it's after midnight, we're sitting around a table in a dark room, we both each got our own candle, and it's just a good sort of spooky, eerie vibe. This is actually how I used to celebrate Halloween when I was a kid, because my parents were very Catholic and anti-Halloween, so we'd have to pretend not to be at home, and they would be like, yes, we have to turn on all the lights and sit around and eat dinner around a candle and speak in hushed voices, and we have to pretend not to be home when the trick-or-treaters come around. And then they'd be...
It's like you had everything prepped for a seance except the seance itself. It's
I
like
know.
you were just a Ouija board away from just contacting the spirits.
Well, that's just it. I was like, Mom, I'm pretty sure we're like drawing more evil spirits to us by doing things this way than if we just, went out trick-or-treating. But
now let's just pray over and over again. You mean chanting? Yes.
Yeah. No, it was fun times, sort of, but I also missed out on a lot. Quite sadly. Anyway, it is the Halloween season, and we are pumped and excited to deliver another episode. This time, what are we diving into today, Oliver?
So we're doing for this episode the subgenre of the Gothic horror movies.
Gothic horror is probably, well,
it's really the classic. Probably the original horror genre would probably be the Gothic. Gothic movies.
That might very well be. I mean, I was going to say, like, this is probably, like, one of my favorite genres, but then I'm like, well, I actually haven't seen that many of these movies. I mean, I'm excited for the conversation that we'll have, because I love Gothic horror as an aesthetic and an atmosphere and a setting and that sort of thing. And of the Gothic horror films that I've seen, they're very much my kind of movie.
Yeah, mine too. It's
once again, maybe after this conversation, it'll expand my list of things that I need to see, and I'll become more cultured as a result of it, hopefully. And hopefully our viewers the same way, or listeners.
I almost feel like I think I almost like the idea of the Gothic genre sometimes more than the Gothic movies themselves. There's been a few that have really been great at the Gothic genre, but it's almost like just the idea and feel of it itself. It's almost like sometimes you could just be looking at like a Halloween postcard and being like, yeah, that's got that same Gothic feel that I love in the movies I see. And
that's a great way of putting it, the Halloween postcard, because I think of that with like Christmas postcards, right? When you get those, I don't know, there's like certain artists that paint things in a certain kind of romantic, old school, Christmassy kind of way, and you're like, that's it. That's Christmas.
Yeah. Well, and I guess for the Gothic one, it's like, I don't know, like, I guess the first thing I think of when I think Gothic, I think, nighttime with a castle over like a full moon. Maybe there's some like, bats flapping around, like maybe like a horse and carriage is pulling up,
Yeah.
Just that,
Old,
like that's
creepy wardrobe.
Villagers.
A creepy man with a lantern in the dark.
Yeah. A lot of fog.
There's a whole aesthetic and a whole vibe there.
Yeah. It's really like it's kind of like the real classic. It's that classic horror vibe that I guess it's just so classic that I guess a lot of modern movies almost kind of stray away from it, because maybe they just sort of feel like, like it's been seen so many times, but yeah, like you don't get probably like that's just the perfect spooky atmosphere. Like I still don't think that can really be beat, just like a bunch of cemeteries with fog around them, with like a little hut maybe out in the background, and
tombstones, those old like broken down tombstones and stuff, in a cemetery with a jagged little fence around it.
There's not a single character with a cell phone.
Yeah, exactly.
I don't know. Just like, like some character in the distance with like a cape and a top hat, and you don't know if he's a good guy or a bad guy. And
See, that's the interesting thing about nighttime back in those days, right? It was really dark. There weren't lights. There wasn't electricity.
Yeah.
So everything was concealed in the dark, and you couldn't. Wasn't a lot you could do without candle.
Yeah, it's like once the sun went down, you kind of all like rushed to get to your homes or maybe the local pub. That wouldn't be maybe that far from your place. But you wouldn't just be kind of like lounging around, having like a nightly stroll in the woods for the most part.
Or even hanging out in your home too much because, again, you would have had to burn candles and things like that. Burn the midnight oil.
And so we were talking earlier about kind of, what kind of officially kind of makes what would define something as a truly Gothic horror. And we both kind of came to the agreement that, it really should be set in the Gothic period. Because I guess there are sort of more modern tales that could almost kind of qualify as being somewhat Gothic. But I think we're trying to kind of keep it strictly to kind of 18th century and maybe very early 20th century periods. But I don't know. I think like once the electric kind of car starts making an appearance, that's maybe we're maybe getting a little bit outside of the Gothic horror. I kind of really think of it, like especially in like the 1800s periods, so, everything from that kind of, from like the Mary Shelley chunk to the Bram Stoker era, anything in that kind of period, which would then include like Edgar Allan Poe. Maybe I'd go as recent as H.P. Lovecraft's material, but I
think the appearance of the automobile is kind of the.
Oh, did you hear that? That was what I said earlier.
Yeah, I heard you say that. I think that was kind of like one of the definitive kind of one of the definitive marks of like, okay, we're past.
Yeah, we're in the new technological era now.
Yeah.
I guess like the nice thing about Gothic horror is you can kind of trace it back to some like the earliest movies of the genre. I mean, in many ways, horror kind of started off in movies, really with the Gothic horrors. You could take it back to Cabinet of Dr. Caligari. That's probably the earliest one I can kind of think of as, German expressionistic surrealism, but it was also had a lot of, Gothic kind of, Gothic kind of architecture. I'm kind of thinking of like the set pieces, even like the way like, the characters looked. I don't know. That one to me is kind of like, like a lot of people regard Cabinet of Dr. Caligari as basically the first kind of real official horror movie. And I'd also say it was a pretty decent Gothic horror one, and kind of followed by, Nosferatu, Phantom of the Opera, all the Universal kind of horror movies of like the 30s and early 40s. Like they all kind of seem to go for the Gothic horror style.
Yeah. The other thing that I think of around that time is like the noir mystery type of stuff.
Mm-hmm.
Kind of almost these crime drama whodunits. But that are
as you mean though, like, but as far as Gothic horror,
no.
Okay.
I'm saying like while there was a lot of that Gothic horror stuff going on in those time periods, there was also like trying to think of just like what other.
Oh yeah. There's the gangster films, screwball comedies. Film noir.
Yeah, I mean more so like other types of horror that was happening,
Yeah, I get in the 40s. Yeah. So, you're right. Like in the
mystery type
in the
of
film
stuff,
noir period, there was also, I guess, kind of in the 40s, there was the what's his face? I forget his name, but there was a whole bunch of these low budget, but kind of at the time kind of considered modern horror movies, and one of them was like Cat People. I don't know if you've heard of Cat People, and they feel very much actually like film noir movies in a lot of ways, but also with just this extra edge of kind of like a horror element to them. And it was the same company that later they also did one called I Walked with the Zombie, and they made a few other ones, but that was kind of almost like the beginning of them kind of trying to do things a little bit more modern.
Yeah.
Of course, it's still, you look back and you're like, well, this is definitely set in the 40s, so it doesn't feel that modern. But compared to things like Dracula and Frankenstein before that, they were like Cat People. There's electric automobiles in that one.
Yeah, yeah. So that's not, you wouldn't classify that as Gothic horror.
No,
just so we're
no.
Understanding. We're not talking about Gothic horror right now, but just other types of stuff that was going on. But when I look up a list of Gothic horror movies, because I was trying to sort of remind myself of, okay, which ones have I seen and what have I not seen? A lot of it was stuff from like, the 50s and prior.
Yeah.
You know?
And the 60s too, right? Like other than like the early Universal ones, the other big chunk I think of when I think of Gothic horror is the Roger Corman Poe films of the 60s, and then also the Hammer films of the 60s, which were essentially these very elaborate period piece films that had kind of little sprinkles of horror in them, but for the most part they were kind of almost like kind of period piece dramas with a little bit of spooky kind of atmosphere to them. I don't know. I'm kind of not the biggest fan of the Poe films or even the Hammer movies for the most part. I kind of was really curious about them, so I wanted to watch a lot of them. And after watching a number of them, they're not my favorites. There's definitely some that are better than others, but they're just really not spooky at all, I find. I do like some of the sets of some like the Poe ones, and there's a few neat like Hammer ones, but I don't know. Have you delved much into the Roger Corman, Edgar Allan Poe movies or the British Hammer films of that time?
I probably haven't seen like any of them.
I don't know if you're missing out too much.
Right.
I mean, it's...
Well, it's nice that you have at least a point of reference for it, right? Because some of this stuff, I'd like to know what it's all about. Kind of like what you did. It sounds like you had kind of a curiosity and you explored it. But that's exactly what I was going to say in regards to so many of these movies that I looked up in the lists. They were in the 1950s and prior movies. It's like clearly there was a lot of that stuff being made in that time period, and I feel like not a ton of it in the last several decades, which is a shame
for
to
the
me.
Gothic horror. Yeah,
because I feel like there's just so much that I would love to see done with it in kind of a modern, with kind of modern production values.
Yeah, I really don't know why they... I mean, the only thing I could think of is that it's definitely more expensive to do Gothic horror as opposed to doing just a more modern movie. Just anytime you're doing a period piece, there's just a lot more details and elements that go into it. Yeah,
but maybe depending on how you do it too. Like if you're going to do it with some small sets, and a small cast of characters, it doesn't have to be a lot.
Yeah. I mean, part of the reason why Hammer Studios made so many was actually for economic reasons. Like they were smart about it. They were basically just making the same types of movies over and over. So they would
reuse costumes and set pieces and stuff.
Most of their stuff was kind of like filmed at like the same kind of locations, reusing the costumes, and they would just kind of pump these things out. And Hammer Studios kind of like came back like not that long ago, and they started making kind of new movies. And I was just sort of like, oh, is there going to be this new resurgence of just tons of Gothic horror modern Gothic horror movies? But weirdly, it almost kind of seemed like Hammer didn't even bother with that. It was almost like Hammer's like, oh, we're going to make new horror movies, but we're going to do what everyone else is doing, which is kind of just making modern
jump scare
kind of horror movies.
Paranormal.
So that was kind of like disappointing. Because it's like you said, like, who's really making the Gothic horror movies of today? It's almost like...
well, that's just it. I was looking back at kind of what I'd seen in the last little while, and it was like, well, it's really only a handful of movies. It's not an exhausting list. Like, I think there's a lot more that could be done. A lot more that I'd like to see done.
Yeah. It's almost like you might have to almost like luck out more for like waiting for the occasion. Like, you know, every now and then there's like a Gothic show that comes out and you're like, well, I guess this will be my Gothic. I remember...
well, maybe... I
was going to just say, like, I remembered, I guess it was maybe like around like 10 years or so ago, but there was that show, Penny Dreadful.
Okay.
Do you remember that show, or did you ever check it out?
I don't think I watched it.
I was living with a bunch of people, and it became a show kind of that we worked into our rotation. I guess mainly because of me, because I was the horror guy. But I mean, it was a really high production value. Like, I mean, it felt like you were watching movie quality episodes. It had Eva Green in it. There was a number of other actors in it, and
I love Eva Green.
Yeah, it was.
Wasn't she in? Was she in Crimson Peak?
She's definitely in Dark Shadows. She's the witch in Dark Shadows.
And then she was in that movie about the peculiar children or whatever.
Oh, is she? Okay, yeah. Yeah, she's in I think she's in the 300 sequel. She was a Bond girl. She's in a lot of I think she's actually a bit of an underrated actress. Like, I think she's like a real character actress.
Yeah. Yeah, she's awesome.
Yeah, she makes interesting. I think she likes a lot of like horror and offbeat stuff, just based on her career overall. Like, it seems like she picks kind of unique projects. Yeah. But yeah, I don't know. Penny Dreadful. I didn't continue watching the series after a certain point, but I was, again, maybe it was just that thing where I just was having such a need for some gothic horror that I just, I took whatever was available. And at that time, the show Penny Dreadful, I guess, was, kind of giving me that fix.
Yeah.
It was also a show that, as you started watching it more, you realized it started bringing in famous gothic characters. Oh, okay. So eventually Frankenstein shows up, like Dorian Gray shows up, and there's like a Wolfman character, and so slowly you're almost like, oh, this is like kind of like the Avengers of gothic horror.
Oh, I'm having a look at it on IMDb here.
Yeah,
it's
I don't know.
Timothy Dalton in it.
Oh, great! Yeah, no, that makes. I'm starting to remember that now. Yeah, no, it was a neat little show. I don't know how many seasons it went for. I don't think it was many. I'd be surprised if it was even more than 2 or 3. But that's kind of one of the more recent things I could think of. There was that, and there was Crimson Peak by Guillermo del Toro, which visually looked like a very bona fide. Gothic horror film. I think you and me both kind of agreed that, it could have been a little bit scarier maybe. But the visuals were about as good as anything I could ask for Gothic horror. I hope he does more.
I love like the house that they're in. And again, one of the things that's really quintessential, I don't know if that's the right word. It's essential to a good Gothic horror film is a nice setting, right?
Yeah.
And so a scary old castle type of mansion is I don't know, just something. It's a place that I like to spend time in, and so if you're going to watch a movie, you're going to spend time in this world, whatever it is, whatever the setting is. And so a scary old mansion like that, it's really interesting and cool, and that's a very attractive feature for me in terms of compelling me to want to watch the film.
Yeah. Because it's a Gothic horror is, again, kind of like the most classic kind of imagery of horror. It's kind of like most of our introductions to even what horror is. So I'm just kind of wondering, do you remember, or can you think of maybe what your introduction to the first Gothic horror thing that you were introduced to? Do you think you'd be able to know what that was? Or
yeah, that's a good question.
Because that would probably be the first spooky thing you would maybe connected
Honestly,
to. Maybe
it was probably like some sort of kids show or something. How like?
Well, mine definitely was.
Yeah.
So that's why I'm I was kind of curious if maybe yours was.
But
the
I'm
same
trying
as
to think of exactly what it would be. Yeah, probably some sort of a kids show where you're given a little bit of a taste of that time period, the aesthetic and stuff. Although I will say that when I was, I think Sleepy Hollow came out in 1999. And I remember seeing the poster for that in the movie theater. And I was just like drawn to it. I was like, wow, look at this image. It was a good poster, Look at this headless horseman. Heads will roll. That sounds like the kind of movie I want to watch. And it gives off this vibe. It's got that font, the red font, the faces of Johnny Depp and Christina Ricci. I don't know. It just gave me that vibe. And I think that it's almost like I was just born to be drawn to this this genre.
And it's a hard thing to kind of explain to people who aren't into this stuff, because it's not like there's exactly like a really logical reason that we're attracted to this stuff. It's because it's kind of supposed to be something that's supposed to kind of scare you and sort of repel you to a degree. And so I guess some people think it's kind of weird when people are into this sort of stuff, but it's just, I don't know. It's the look, it's the style, it's the feel. I mean, sometimes I don't think I would enjoy spending a night alone in a abandoned, supposedly haunted house. That's not really my jam, but I don't know, even the idea of like kind of like strolling through a cemetery at night is actually really kind of calming and peaceful to me.
Well, I was about to say, like what you and I have done, at least a handful of late night cemetery strolls together. And it's like, why are we here? Like, this isn't supposed to be the place you go to feel good, but it's like exactly like the type of atmosphere I like to be in. It brings me peace. Yeah.
Like it's, I mean, there's definitely, I think, like an energy to a lot of those places. And yeah, to me, it doesn't seem to be like a particularly like bad energy. I mean, and when we do those kind of like walks in those cemeteries, we're not disrespectful, I think if anything, we're probably very respectful,
Yeah.
And, I don't know. It's some people just, that's not like their thing. And I totally get that.
Yeah.
But I don't know, maybe it's also just, maybe the Gothic thing, it's also just like a bit of like, it's just reminiscing to an older time, a time now long forgotten kind of, and even if you take the spooky stuff out of it, there's just the architecture, the clothing, like there's just a lot of aesthetic things about it. Even if it wasn't spooky, that I think actually probably more people can relate to the appeal of. Just going back to what probably my introduction to Gothic horror, I don't think you can call this horror, but my introduction to Gothic anything would probably be Sesame Street.
It was The Count.
The Count. I that's probably the earliest thing I could think of where I was just kind of like, ooh, like what is this? I like this,
It's true. The Count is like one of the most appealing Sesame Street characters.
It's just like the easiest, least scary way to like introduce a child to the concept of, I don't know, something spooky or just, yeah. And it's educational. You get to learn about numbers while you're at it. So, everybody wins. But that was probably like the beginning of that. And I remember when I was a kid, I used to watch The Hilarious House of Frightenstein, which maybe some of the older Canadian listeners might remember from like the early 70s. But it was this wacky like children's program where there was like about a dozen different characters all played by the same guy, and it was just like a zany kind of weird, almost shouldn't have been a kids show. Vincent Price is kind of like, I think Vincent Price showed up for like a day's work and they filmed like all of his stuff in a day, and like he just kind of does these little like poems sprinkled throughout every episode. But again, it's the sets. It's the costumes. Nothing was really like scary in this series, but it was just a place where I was just like, I want to go there. I want to hang out there with those people. Yeah. And just, as I got older, anytime I would see anything like that, I would just kind of get more into it and slowly get more into the scarier stuff. But,
I love that stuff because you mentioned like, it's almost not a kid's show. Yeah. And that's the type of stuff that I tend to really be drawn to as well. As a kid, is you're like, this is, it's not the typical, I don't know, dumbed down,
you can
overly childish, overly tame.
A kid can kind of tell when they're being like condescended, where they're just kind of,
I think
their intelligence is kind of being insulted a bit, and you're just kind of like, come on, like I can take more than this,
Yeah.
And so I always,
is this supposed to appeal to me?
Yeah. And so I almost felt
supposed to enjoy watching Barney.
Yeah.
I didn't even enjoy it when I was 4 years old.
I was just, I think I was too old for Barney when it first came out, so I missed the boat on that one.
Yeah.
But
I think I was like the target demographic, and I was like, this is the dumbest shit I've ever seen.
Well, the Jim Henson stuff was like, there was a real art form to things like Sesame Street and other things where they were able to make things both for kids, but also have some things for the parents. And I think even if you're a kid, you can kind of appreciate that there were some things meant for the older people.
Yeah, but also that, like we say, like they weren't condescending. I feel like the Muppets and Sesame Street and stuff like that. Well, I don't have too many memories of watching Sesame Street, but some of this stuff that was like, you felt like they understood how to entertain children without treating them like I don't know what the word is, inferiors or something, or
like kids. Like I don't know. Yeah, they treated them like I don't know, just like little like smaller beings who, you know, it's a lot of
it's like simplified. It's maybe like a little bit simplified. Yeah, but it's not like you're not delving into certain territory, you know, or
yeah. Like, you know, again, like maybe people today would maybe, if you were to suggest a character like the Count, there might be people today being like, I don't know, he's a vampire. That might be a little bit too scary, you know. But they're like, no. Like, well, the kids understand that, you know. Yeah.
Although I do remember, I remember when I was about 5, maybe 6, there was a couple there like, so we had this family, some family friends, and they had a few daughters that would come over to our house sometimes, and I put on the movie Willow, and I was like, yeah, I love Willow. You guys are going to love it too. And they were just like, and my mom came into the room and she was like, do you guys like this? And they were like, no. They like found it too scary. And yeah. So I don't know. Maybe like there's something to be said for that with
I had a friend who was terrified of the monolith in 2001.
Oh yeah.
So it's
maybe he was just like profoundly connected to its meaning, and he was like, it's too much.
I think it was the music more than anything. The music was kind of telling him like, you're supposed to be scared right now. And again, I think he was a very sheltered kid who hadn't been exposed to very much when it came to movies and things like that. I can kind of get it. There's weird stuff with the monolith, but even me at that age, I was just sort of like, oh man, it's a good thing I showed you this and not some of the other stuff I could have shown you. But just back to the Gothic horror. It's we can both agree. You know, I think we need some more of it. It's it's like, I don't know, genres kind of go through like phases and stuff. And I mean, like I would more than invite just like a nice little like decade where we just get, you know, tons of Gothic horror until we're all sick of it, and then we can take a break from it. But you know, there hasn't been
I'd almost prefer it to be like stretched out and kind of just, you know, a moderate amount spread out throughout the years, you know. But because, you know, I think that anytime you get something overdone all at once, it can be a bit much as well.
And we there have been like a few you know, fairly like I say within like the last 10 years, like, you know, we have had we brought up Crimson Peak a few times. There's The Woman in Black. Like there definitely are a few of these Gothic horrors that do come out now and again. And I guess maybe the problem is that I guess maybe none of them recently have been a super bona fide hit, and maybe that's why they haven't been, you know, trying to do a ton more.
Well, that's just it. So there was 2 Woman in Black movies. I don't know how successful they were, but you know, again, they appealed to me right off the bat, just kind of from seeing the trailer or whatever.
Did you see both of them?
I didn't actually watch the second one. I should.
Yeah, I haven't seen the second one.
But I mean, I can't think of a lot of other ones that came out. I remember enjoying that movie, and again, enjoying spending time in the story and in the setting of that movie.
I was surprised how much I liked it, because I had seen the original BBC Woman in Black from the 80s, and like that one's like known to be quite creepy in its own right. And I was just sort of like, well, you can't really like recreate the stuff that movie's known for, because at least anybody who's seen it just wouldn't be effective for them. And luckily they didn't. The Daniel Radcliffe remake is a very different movie, but also very effective. Like it was I couldn't have been happier with it. I haven't seen it since I first saw it in theaters, but
I only saw it the one time too. So.
I don't know if you felt the same way. I remembered while watching the movie that I was like, this movie might have like the most jump scares of a horror movie I've ever seen. I just remember there being just tons of, and it wasn't, it didn't like ruin the movie. Normally I hate jump scares, especially if there's tons of them, like they get kind of
ghost,
annoying.
like just flying at them or whatever.
Yeah.
Things like that.
Yeah.
Okay.
But I don't know, like for some reason, I was okay with them in Woman in Black, like, cause there was also a lot of stuff that wasn't jump scares that was also creepy and effective.
Well, it's kind of like, I could see that was going on, and it's like, okay, they're doing the jump scares. But it's not that I completely have, I'm not totally against the idea of jump scares. But again, it's just the fact that there's other things going on too, besides them using the jump scare as the entire gimmick of the movie, you know?
Yeah.
And if you're using them in the context of an interesting story and an interesting place, then why not? I'm okay with it.
Yeah. Just while we're still on talking about Daniel Radcliffe, he actually also did another Gothic horror movie a few years later. Man, I'm trying to remember what the title is for it. I mean, I don't know if it's just called Frankenstein, but it's a Frankenstein adaptation where Daniel Radcliffe plays Igor. I actually haven't seen it.
Yeah, let me go.
But it seems, I don't know, like Daniel Radcliffe seems to be a fan of Gothic horror. Like,
well, even Harry Potter in some ways has like some dark. I don't know if I would go so far as to call it horror, but you know, definitely Gothic.
I mean, they're witches, right?
Well, exactly. That's just it. You know,
there's werewolves in it, and I don't know. I've only seen about half of the Harry Potter franchise, but Daniel Radcliffe, he's also got a great face for horror and Gothic horror. I'm trying
to look up this movie. Victor Frankenstein.
Gotcha.
One?
Yeah, that sounds like the one
from 2015. Yeah, I didn't see this either.
No, yeah. That's the thing is, like, I don't think these movies particularly do amazingly.
Yeah, well, and I think that one of the things is at some point I got so tuned out of modern movies that I just started overlooking things. But maybe some of these are worth watching, actually.
Yeah, when it comes to modern horror, like, weirdly enough, I always seem to base it on just the rating. If it's not rated R, I become very suspicious about it.
Yeah, you know, it's interesting because I don't think that it has to be an R-rated thing, because I could totally enjoy a Gothic horror film that's a little more like family friendly or whatever. Like, for instance, you might consider The Addams Family to fall into that category, maybe a little bit.
Well, I don't think of The Addams Family as a horror movie. I wouldn't want The Addams Family to be rated R. I mean, well, who knows? I mean, down the road, I wouldn't be against a rated R Addams Family, but that's the tone of the Addams Family movies are exactly what they should be.
Right. They're not. You're right. They're not horror at all, but they just kind of have that. They're Halloween.
Yeah. Well, I think you can say like they're comedy horrors. They're definitely morbid and Halloweeny and. Well,
that's just it. Yeah, kind of morbid and dark, right?
Yeah. But just with like a nice gallows sense of humor that I like.
Yeah.
I'm trying to think what there was like another kind of recent Gothic horror thing that I was trying to think of recently. But I guess that's the problem is like, as far as like the new ones, there's not a whole lot.
Yeah, so like one of the ones that I had written down as a possibility was Dark Shadows, the Tim Burton Dark Shadows movie.
Mm-hmm.
And again, that's not really. It's like it mostly takes place in modern times, but in this castle mansion type of thing. So it has a bit of this crossover modern Gothic horror thing. Yeah. And of course, most of the characters are living like as modern people, but you got Johnny Depp's character, who's a character out of a time capsule. Yeah. And then the main girl there, who, I'm trying to remember. I don't know. There's just a lot of Gothic-y sort of things about it.
Yeah, so. I guess it just seems like in this day and age, if you're usually going to get a Gothic horror movie, it's going to be some sort of a retelling, usually of one of the classic Gothic horrors, where it'll be like a Dracula or a Frankenstein kind of story. And And in those cases, like a lot of times, like just the default, they'll be like, okay, yeah, well, we'll make it Gothic because, you know, that's kind of the original setting.
Yeah.
But yeah, it'd just be nice to see like some more kind of like original Gothic stories that just kind of have a completely different, you know, premise.
Yeah, definitely. That aren't just pulling from what's been done before.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'd love to see more of that. Yeah, one of the, I guess I wrote down a number of Tim Burton things because we've got like Sleepy Hollow on the list, which we talked about in our slasher episode a little bit. But let's maybe talk also about Sweeney Todd, because Tim Burton is obviously a guy who like loves his Gothic sensibilities. I mean, that's very much his style in terms of a lot of the things that he's done with The Corpse Bride and his art style, art direction style. So he did Sweeney Todd, he did Sleepy Hollow, Dark Shadows. Sweeney Todd is like one of my favorite Tim Burton movies.
Oh, really?
And yeah. I don't know how you feel about it, but like, so obviously, okay, it's a musical, it's a bit of comedy, it's horror, slasher, you might even say, but again, love the setting, love the aesthetic, love the production design and everything, but I really love the music as well. Like, I'm actually a big fan of the musical and the songs and stuff. You've seen it, right?
Yeah, I hope I've seen the entire thing. I think it's one of those things where like I watch the movie like in chunks, and then I feel like I eventually decided to just be like, I'm going to just sit down and watch the whole thing. I guess I have more mixed feelings about it. It's a shame because it's like, it kind of was this movie that kind of came out in a period where a lot of other Tim Burton movies just didn't seem very impressive to me. And so when Sweeney Todd came around, I was kind of like, oh, this is kind of like coming back to form. Mm-hmm. Like the thing I like most about Sweeney Todd is the look. Like that's where I'm just like, oh yeah, like this really is aesthetically, this is definitely one of Tim Burton's most Gothic movies. But I guess maybe the place where you and me will disagree was that the thing that I probably am like the least fan of about the movie is the musical stuff. Maybe that's because like I'm kind of a hard critic in general when it comes to musicals. And now the thing is, like, I know like it's that it was a famous musical for a really long time. I don't know when it first became a musical because it was originally not a musical.
In the 70s. Well,
it was originally, I think it was always a play. But it was originally like a non-musical play.
You might be right about that.
It kind of became like a Little Shop of Horrors thing where they were like, oh, it's so dark. What if we kind of made it into a musical to make it a little bit easier?
Well, same with like Phantom of the Opera, right? Where that's taken this evolution. And it's like, obviously, it's probably become best known as the Andrew Lloyd Webber musical.
Right.
But that wasn't like the origins of it. And frick, I remember reading about that. I was trying to figure out when was the actual... or what was the actual origin of the Phantom of the Opera? Because there's the old silent films. There was,
I believe the original is like a book.
Novel.
I believe the novel's where it's started.
So it's just taken this whole evolution and kind of become something very different from what it originally.
Yeah, well, it's almost at this point. It's like because of the Andrew Lloyd Webber stuff, the Phantom's almost become. He almost then like kind of became. He went from almost being like a villain to like an anti-hero to almost just like a hero almost to a degree if it wasn't for like the murders and stuff. But you know what I mean? It's like because in the Andrew Lloyd Webber one, like they really kind of have to try to pass it off as this kind of like love story. So they kind of really try to, it's Eric, the Phantom, just kind of seems to become more sympathetic. With each kind of like rendition.
Yeah. And they become a little more romanticized.
Yeah.
But that's one of the things I like about Sweeney Todd is how I think it still manages to remain very well planted in horror while still being a musical. And I think the music is brilliantly written and composed. It's just a very dark score and great lyrics. Some of them are very entertaining and funny though, too. You'll have like the Pirelli song or the one about the pies of London. And you listen to those, or what was the one? Try the priest, da, 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 where they're singing about like which kinds of people are the most pleasant to eat.
Okay, yeah.
And I don't know, it's like, it's very funny, but it's dark comedy. That maybe that's one of the reasons I like it so much, is like, I love the dark comedy. And some of these songs are actually very like kind of happy, joyful, pleasant songs too. Like there's the one, by the sea, Mr. Todd, da 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 ba da ba. It's not like a dark, grim song at all, but a bunch of the other ones are very much are like that.
Yeah, for me, it's like, it's got that kind of that style of musicals that I guess I know that there's a term for it, but it's essentially where the characters are talking, it's like they're singing as they talk. And, it's kind of like the trope of like, kind of like the Broadway musical, that I've always kind of had a bit of a hard time with. But there's a very small number of musicals that I'm like genuinely like, oh, I love the story. I love the songs. Like I love it all. When it does happen for me, I'm like, it's great when it happens, but
I can understand. I think that is a bit of a hard sell for a lot of people. It just happens to resonate with me quite a bit. I think that through song is a great way to do storytelling sometimes, if the music is good and the lyrics are well written. Which I think Stephen Sondheim's pretty brilliant with his compositions and stuff. Yeah.
I've been meaning to give it another watch because it's been a while, and like the fact that I'm almost like not even 100% sure if I've seen it from beginning to end. Yeah. It definitely deserves another watch for me.
I think it's I would definitely recommend checking it out. And maybe you can get past the musical element a bit, but I know that is like a barrier for a lot of people. I find it I remember when I went to see it, and I was in quite a depressed mood at the time too. Just, I don't know, life was shitty at the time. And I was like, wow, this is just such a grim, depressing movie. But I just love it so much. It's like sometimes you like a depressing movie or a depressing story.
Oh yeah. Yeah. No, it's yeah, no, I've got a lot of those.
Yeah, that I don't know. Oh, again, it's one of those strange, things where you can be drawn to something that isn't really designed to make you feel good. Yeah, and yet in a strange way, it does make you feel good. Mm-hmm.
Well, one interesting thing was with Sweeney Todd was when it first came out. Like that was my introduction to Sweeney Todd. I did not know that it was a thing. So that was what I was kind of excited. I was just like, oh, like Tim Burton's doing this like really original thing. And then I can't remember what it was. I was like I was at like a friend's house, and then I found like on like the coffee table this like DVD of an old like mid 1970s Sweeney Todd production with like Angela Lansbury. And I'm like, what the hell is this? Yeah. And I'm like, how long has this thing been around for? And it's funny because when you see that one, it just goes to show the touch of what Tim Burton does, because that's what this channel is about Gothic horror, and he really restylized that whole thing to a Tim Burton feel. When I looked at the 70s production, it was about as straightforward as possible. Like the only thing that was kind of cryptic about it was that they were murdering people. Mm-hmm. But you look at it and it's if you know who Angela Lansbury is, you got to just picture Angela Lansbury in a dress. Sweeney Todd, I don't even know who the actor was, some kind of, pudgy, balding British guy, and he's just in a suit. Yeah. That's your Sweeney Todd and I guess whatever the Helena Bonham Carter character was. So it was just very straightforward. Yeah, if anything that was probably the closest to the same would probably be the songs. That would probably be...
I'm sure they are. I'm sure the songs probably is exactly the musical. Yeah. But I think, and then that's one of the things that I love about what Tim Burton does is he takes those characters and that world and brings a real design sensibility to make it a lot more appealing and memorable and iconic and stuff, right? It's like when I think of Sweeney Todd, I think of Johnny Depp's Sweeney Todd. I don't think of the guy, who is just kind of this average dude from the musical. Like I like that there's more of an artistic interpretation placed on on what Tim Burton does and how Johnny Depp's portrayed, and everybody in that movie. But that just tends to be my sensibility. I think there's a lot of people who would probably be like, no, I prefer the original Broadway. Sorry, I have a cough, by the way, in case you can't hear me hacking it up over here. But yeah, there's probably a lot of people who would be a lot more, would resonate a lot more with the original Broadway production, maybe because they're theater purists, I don't know. But I like the film, man, and that was my introduction to it, so maybe that's the reason why. But I think it was a very well done adaptation and suitable artistic interpretation of a classic musical. And on that note, we have nothing more to say.
Well, I wasn't sure if I wanted to segue into what I was going to say yet, but yeah, I mean, I don't know. Because I mean, you know, we've got our top 10 list, but then there's also, I'm just looking, there's also a whole bunch of movies that didn't make my list, and I'm like, should I chat about these at all?
Yeah. Well,
it's tough if they're ones that you haven't seen, but I mean, I don't know, if they sound interesting, they might pique your interest for a future watch, maybe.
Yeah.
So one of the things that I was torn about this was, whether I want to like kind of overlap certain movies that, you know, might end up getting spoken about in multiple podcasts. Like, for instance, there's like a werewolf movie I like a lot that could arguably be a Gothic film, but I'm wondering, should I save that if we do a werewolf episode?
Yeah, right. Well, I know I definitely have some crossover here because I have one movie that was from our slasher film series that I'm going to talk about.
Okay.
And I don't know, if there's some crossover, it probably isn't a big deal.
Yeah.
But yeah, there's definitely some other stuff we could talk about. Like, I know you were talking about The Raven a little bit, hey?
Yeah, so The Raven is possibly on my top 10 list. Like, I've got a few different options. I can kind of shuffle things around, but when I was going through my list, I wanted to make sure that I included at least one Edgar Allan Poe film, because I just really, if there's maybe, you know, kind of one sort of writer that I would associate maybe Gothic horror the most with, might actually be Edgar Allan Poe. And so, yeah, The Raven is probably not the best one of the Roger Corman films of the 60s, but that was the first one that I saw, and it was probably one of the earliest kind of horror movies I saw. Like, I'm pretty sure I was about 3 the first time I saw it. And it's a good thing it was that one, because it's the lightest of those horror movies. It's practically a comedy, and almost has little to no connection to the actual Raven poem of Edgar Allan Poe's. It was really just kind of used as an inspiration. There was also an old horror movie from the 1930s of the classic era called The Raven that had Bela Lugosi in it, which is another one that's probably even less connected to the Edgar Allan Poe story. But yeah, just talking about the 60s one, you know, it introduced me to a great cast of characters. The Raven stars Boris Karloff, Peter Lorre, Vincent Price, and a young Jack Nicholson. And basically the highlight of the movie is probably towards the end, where the two main wizards, being Vincent Price and Boris Karloff, basically have like a magic battle. It's almost kind of reminds me a little bit of almost the battle at the end of Disney's Sword in the Stone between Merlin and the witch. Yeah, I just have very fond, kind of nostalgic feelings towards The Raven. What are your thoughts on it? I think you've seen it, right? Have you seen that? Oh, you haven't?
Oh,
again,
okay.
It's
on my, it's been, had it on a hard drive for a long time to watch because I couldn't find it anywhere.
Have you seen any of the Corman Poe films?
No, and again, I haven't seen a lot of these older films in general.
Yeah.
I think The Raven came out in 1960.
63,
maybe?
I think.
Okay,
yeah.
63. Yeah, no, I think it was a handful of years ago. I was kind of made aware of it, probably through a conversation with you. And so it's been on my list to watch for a while.
Yeah.
But
I don't know if that's the best one to introduce yourself to, although it's got probably the best cast of all of them. But it's like one of the, the lesser serious ones.
so isn't it related to something else? It's like the prequel to some other film or the sequel to some other.
The Raven? No. I
For
mean,
some reason I
it's
thought it was-
loosely based. I guess it's very loosely based on the Edgar Allan Poe poem.
Okay.
But basically, the nice thing about the Roger Corman Poe films for our listeners, I don't know whether our listeners if you guys have seen these movies or if you're thinking of watching them, you can watch them all out of order. Some of them aren't even based on Edgar Allan Poe titles. There's like a couple of them I think that they took from H.P. Lovecraft, and there's like one or two that aren't even really related to anything, but because they kept kind of reusing the same sets and costumes, they all have they all kind of feel like they're maybe in the same world. And I don't know, I made sure I kind of watched them all. I kind of struggled through a lot of them, to be honest. The majority of them are just kind of period piece melodramas, like a little hint of spooky things, maybe towards the end. I just don't know if they've aged all that well as far as, it depends on what you're looking for when you want to see a horror movie. And the gothic stuff about these movies is fine. Like that stuff's great. But they're just very, they're maybe a little bit overly talky, and they I don't know, after a certain point you kind of start seeing a lot of like sort of similarities where you're just like, oh, okay, like it's another dining, table scene. But I guess if there was a few from the series that I would maybe recommend is the first one is, I feel like, one of the most gothic ones, which is Fall of the House of Usher. That's kind of the one that started it off with Vincent Price. And that one was a fairly successful hit, which is why I think they ended up making a lot more of them. Another one that people comment on a lot that's kind of a fan favorite is one called Mask of the Red Death, I believe. Most of these have Vincent Price in them. But
yeah, that one popped up in one of the lists that I was checking out too.
Okay.
Yeah. And it looked cool by the screenshot. Have you seen it?
Yeah, I've seen them. It's I totally get why it is one of the better ones for sure. I don't know if it's, maybe I was expecting a little bit too much with the hype that I was given for it, but yeah, no, I think it is one of the better ones for sure, of the Roger Corman movies. And then I guess I was going to ask, yeah, have you seen any of the? I think maybe you already did mention that. Yeah, you haven't really seen many of the Hammer films, right?
No,
Yeah.
I haven't seen them.
That would be like where a lot of like the Christopher Lee Dracula movies came from.
Yeah, I'd like to watch a lot of that stuff, and we should probably maybe talk about Dracula for a minute, because Dracula is quite a franchise, you might say. I know it's not really a franchise, but what would you even call that? A character and a
Yeah, I mean, I guess once you make enough sequels, I guess you could say like they're franchising it. I guess it's weirder when you're franchising a public domain character.
Yeah, that's just it, right?
But
It's not like some entity that somebody has ownership over.
Yeah. I mean, basically what Hammer Studios was doing was, originally Hammer wasn't even a studio that made horror movies. And then they started making these movies in the mid 50s, which were very different from their Gothic horror. It was almost more like science fiction horror. And those were the Quartermass movies. I don't know if you've ever heard of the Quartermass Experiment. There's about 3 movies. They're actually like, the effects aren't all that impressive, but they're like kind of like intelligent ideas. Like that's kind of the thing that's most gripping about these Quartermass movies. But anyways, that led to them doing more traditional Gothic horror movies. And it was like they basically just decided to kind of reboot all the Universal movies, because again, they were all public domain. So they're like, okay, we're going to redo the classic horror movies, but we're going to do them in color. We're going to have blood. And so they did. And then but then the other thing was they were like, yeah, we're going to like make a whole bunch of sequels also, kind of like what the Universal Studios did. So probably the most famous one is the Christopher Lee Dracula series. But then they also had a pretty big franchise with Frankenstein. They made a bunch of mummy movies. And yeah, most of these movies had Christopher Lee as the antagonist and Peter Cushing as the protagonist. And
Man, I would think Peter Cushing would make a good antagonist himself
he would, yeah.
in that type of movie.
Yeah, well, what it was so Christopher Lee would be Dracula, and then Peter Cushing would be Van Helsing. And for the for the Frankenstein movies, Christopher Lee was Frankenstein, Peter Cushing was Dr. Frankenstein. And there would sometimes be some movies where they would reverse it and Peter Cushing would be the bad guy. But yeah, usually the really well-known ones, it seems like it's always Christopher Lee that they make as the villain. But am I about to do my first plug? I actually made a fan edit where I incorporated all of the Christopher Lee Dracula movies and I edited them all into one film called Taste, it was called Dracula Licks His Wounds.
That sounds great. Where can our listeners go and see that?
You could find that on the Vimeo channel of Rumble Dog Pictures.
Is that on YouTube too? Do you have?
No, I've tried the trailer. If you go on Rumble Dog on YouTube, if you can find the trailer to Dracula Licks His Wounds, and from there is a link to the Vimeo full movie. But the censors got on that one real quick and it got removed from YouTube. But yeah, it's basically
essentially jump to youtube.com and look up Rumble Dog Films.
Rumble Dog Pictures, I think.
Yeah. Or look it up on Vimeo.
Yeah, but the thing is like with those Dracula movies is like Christopher Lee is usually only in like maybe like a quarter of the movie, maybe a third if you're lucky. So that's that's a disappointing thing. But if you watch Dracula Licks His Wounds, that movie is like 90% Christopher Lee Dracula. And it's just him constantly getting resurrected and killed. So yeah, I don't know. It's maybe if you haven't yet seen the Christopher Lee Hammer movies, maybe you might want to check those out first, because I do basically what I'm doing is I'm just compressing them down. But if you have seen all those movies, you might really enjoy Dracula Licks His Wounds. And I haven't actually seen a lot of. I've seen the Hammer Studios version of Frankenstein, but I haven't seen the sequels because I know there's a whole lot of Frankenstein sequels that they've made.
Yeah, a bunch of them. Hey, did you like the one that you watched, the Frankenstein?
Yeah, it was actually. I was kind of skeptical. I was almost kind of just watching it just as a kind of checking it off the list. Mm-hmm. I actually think I liked it more than the Christopher Lee, the first Christopher Lee Dracula one. But I think of the Christopher Lee Dracula ones, my favorite is actually the second one, which is Dracula Prince of Darkness, that was my introduction pretty much to Hammer and definitely cool. Christopher Lee as Dracula.
I would definitely like to watch some of those during this month of October. Yeah.
Well, the thing is, like, the first one is literally just, it's just another adaptation of the classic Bram Stoker story. But all of the sequels after that are just completely original continuation stories of like, what if this is what happened to Dracula next? Mm-hmm. And eventually, like, by the time you get to the 70s, you get like Dracula 1972 AD, where like literally he's like brought into like the swinging, England period of modern day. It does start to get kind of funky there for after a certain point. But honestly, the 1972 AD Dracula is actually a pretty fun one in the franchise.
Yeah, I think it loses a lot of its appeal once it is taken out of the historical context. Yeah. But that's a fun experiment, I suppose. On the subject of Dracula, maybe we should talk about the beloved film, Bram Stoker's Dracula, because I know there's a lot of people who love that, and I'm amongst them. How many Dracula movies have you seen? Have you seen the original? I know you haven't seen Nosferatu, but have you seen the Bela Lugosi one? No. Yeah. Haven't seen it. But like, again, the only one that I have seen is Bram Stoker's Dracula from the 90s there with Gary Oldman and Keanu Reeves and, Yeah. Well, I mean... who's that guy? Freaking... Anthony Hopkins? No, Francis Ford Coppola. The Francis Ford Coppola movie. Bram Stoker's Dracula? Yeah. Oh, sorry. That's the one I'm talking about. There was someone, was it Coppola's name that you were trying to remember just then? Yes. Gotcha. In some ways I would say like maybe, at least for the 90s,
Bram Stoker's Dracula, An Interview with a Vampire. Well, okay, and then of course, because Sleepy Hollow is also, I think, a 90s movie. But those are maybe the three, to me, like the best Gothic horror movies of the 90s, I would say.
Yeah, yeah.
But yeah, no, I love Bram Stoker's Dracula. I don't find it very scary at all, but just I love the look of it.
Me too. The whole and again, that's like a hard R movie too, right? So
I think so. Yeah, I'm pretty sure.
It's a movie that really goes places. Like it goes into these dark places that some others dare not.
I mean, there's there's werewolf Dracula raping Mina, Lucy. Yeah. So that was a little bit, you didn't really get some of that in some of the previous Draculas.
Yeah, no, you got to appreciate a movie that really goes there, right? Because if it's a movie that's about dark themes, it should go to dark places, right?
Yeah.
And it probably does it more than most other movies that I can think of.
Yeah, the only thing that kind of I feel the only thing that's a little bit watered down as a horror movie with the Bram Stoker one is like they're definitely going for making this the love story Dracula movie.
Oh, right.
And so it does, to me, it does get a little bit too sentimental near the end. But that's such a small kind of portion of the movie. Like when I say kind of near the end, I'm talking kind of like when Dracula's kind of like fleeing and there's kind of horse and buggies chasing his horse and buggy. And, Winona Ryder kind of finally is the one to kind of, take out Dracula. And it just, again, it felt too much like, I felt like I was watching Romeo and Juliet at the end or something. That's kind of but it also stands out because there's not a lot of other Dracula movies that kind of do really go for the love story element. There's a late 1970s Dracula movie that kind of, goes a little bit for the romantic stuff.
Well, I kind of do feel like that's a big part of who he kind of is as a character to some degree. I see. And I've never actually read the book Dracula, so I'm not sure. Like, I don't know like the impression that I've gotten from various sources over the years. But I think of vampires as being kind of these romantic creatures in a way.
Well, they're they have like the powers of like seduction and all of that. I guess like in a lot of the other Dracula adaptations, there's kind of this. There's some I can think of where, there is this weird kind of like soulmate kind of thing between Dracula and Mina. There are a few other, like the Werner Herzog Nosferatu movie kind of plays with that a bit. But there's also a lot of them where Dracula is just kind of more like he kind of sees these people as food, and he kind of uses his seduction, but to make them just his victim as opposed to, trying to, embrace his long lost love. I think the Bram Stoker one definitely, from what I have read, like I think they did push the love story element a little bit more than maybe what was in the book. Where in the book he is kind of not really meant to be a sympathetic character. Mm-hmm. But I mean, it also, it kind of works for I don't know. It's like, I'm trying to think of what that Bram Stoker's movie would have been like if they didn't go there. Yeah. I'm not quite sure what they would have done with it. I guess it would have been a little bit more of a straightforward horror movie, but, I don't know. Yeah. It certainly doesn't ruin the movie for me, but, it's the only, I remember it's always like kind of the part of the movie that I kind of get a little bit bored with and almost want to like turn the movie off is like almost like towards the end when there's like the big chase sequence.
Well, you know what else I will say about it is I find it very unmemorable in the sense that I've seen that movie a good 3, maybe 4 times now. And I'm still like, every time I put it on, I'm like, oh yeah, that happens in this. It's almost like I'm watching it for the first time again every time. And then it's like I sort of absorb the movie in kind of this dreamlike state, but I don't seem to ever retain a lot of the details of what goes on, the plot points and stuff,
Yeah.
So, I mean, maybe it's just that type of movie. There's a number of movies that are like that where I really had to watch them several times, sort of in a row, even to even kind of follow the story or get what they were about. Well,
yeah, it's like it doesn't really end. It doesn't end on a creepy note. as most horror movies do. And it almost doesn't even really end in a sort of in a fulfilling way where everything's kind of like wrapped up. Like you're kind of like, okay, well, you know, Dracula's dead. Is Mina now going to just try to forget everything that happened and just run off with Jonathan, you know?
Mm-hmm.
Because that's not even like really like the vibe you're getting. You're kind of getting the vibe that like, no, she was still in love with Dracula. And then it kind of, the last kind of shot is I think just like kind of like a mural on this like the ceiling of like a chapel or whatever it was that Dracula was killed in. And it's, from what I remember, isn't it like a mural of like Dracula and his like wife, like kind of like embracing each other or
I'm going to take your word for it.
I think that's how it ends.
Because again, that's the sort of detail that I would have totally escaped.
And then
right?
an Annie Lennox song comes on with the end credits. Like, again, that was the kind of the only part where I'm just like, ooh, it kind of got this Hollywood ending and this otherwise very Gothic period piece movie.
Yeah, that can always be a little bit weird, right? When you break style in some sense like that, it just like doesn't quite add up.
It feels like they were kind of trying to create this like real like kind of balance to getting like both the male and female audiences into the movie for different reasons. It almost felt like they were trying to get the guys in with the gore and the horror stuff, but then be like, hey, like stay around, ladies. It's a love story. Don't forget. And that's kind of like what the final note is. I'm just sort of like, it's just, for a horror movie, I think it's a bit odd to kind of end it on a sentimental love note. I don't even mind a happy ending for a horror movie, but when it's kind of like a love story ending, I'm kind of like, isn't this Dracula? I don't know. Yeah. But, but I don't know. Yeah. There's great. I love the costumes in that movie. Like,
well, this is just the thing, right? Is I think I just absorb it as an experience and I'm kind of like, I really liked that.
Yeah.
But it's like, I kind of forget about it.
Mm-hmm.
I remember having the experience more than what the actual thing was about.
Yeah. Yeah. No, it's got like the great set pieces and also like the music. I love a buddy of mine. He like, I think it was like when I was like maybe 11 or 12, like a friend of mine gave me like the soundtrack, as a birthday gift. And, I would like listen to that soundtrack while like imagining and writing my own like vampire like projects, because I couldn't like listen to that music and not just think about really just like kind of interesting kind of, I don't know, vampire vibes.
Wojciech Kilar.
And I've noticed like that his theme in Bram Stoker's Dracula later got used in like a number of like movie trailers for other movies.
Oh, okay.
But
I should give this a listen and just like drive around with it.
Maybe
we should listen to this when I drive you home tonight.
Yeah, man. Like there's there's some really good stuff on there. I kind of wished he had made more Hollywood soundtracks, because I think he did a few, but I think a lot of his soundtracks ended up being kind of like European movies. Okay, sure. But like that's such a good soundtrack. I wish he had done more things.
Yeah, it's a shame. Although, so we were about to touch on a movie that I personally really, really love. One of my favorite, probably like one of my favorite films. And it seems like I've grown to love this movie more and more as time has gone on. But that was, you touched on it very briefly, Interview with the Vampire.
Yeah. It's, I guess it's like those two movies were made so close together. I always kind of put them together in a way. And I don't know, vampire movies were like popular in my house growing up, and so there was always like, we would often have like the classic debate of like, what's better, Bram Stoker's Dracula or Interview with the Vampire? And it's like,
I know which one I prefer for sure.
Yeah.
And again, it's partially because I find it more memorable. Like I can actually, kind of recount the events of.
Well, that's the proper way to do a love story vampire movie. I found it was done much better than the way of kind of forcing it more in the Dracula one. But yeah.
And I mean, Interview with the Vampire still has quite a bit of dark things. I don't know what it's rated.
I think it's rated R.
It probably is. Yeah. I remember watching it the first time and like not totally, like I liked it, didn't totally love it. And then it was like through subsequent viewings that I came to appreciate it more and more and be like, yeah, I realize now that I actually really do like this movie. And it's just, to me, anytime you take a journey of like a long stretch of time, I don't know, there's something very enchanting about that, about them going through these different time periods and these different places and stuff. I like the voiceover narration and how he kind of tells the story and just the whole setup of the thing, how you start out in modern day San Francisco and he's giving this strange, bizarre interview to this journalist or whatever he is. It sets up this kind of calm setting in this room, and you like you're about to be swept away on this very I don't know, this very romantic adventure, I guess. a dark romantic adventure.
Even just kind of thinking about the opening of a movie with the credits, and we're just kind of like the camera's just kind of floating through New Orleans.
No, it's San Fran.
Oh, is it San Fran?
Pretty sure.
Oh, okay. Maybe I'm thinking of something. I guess it's earlier in the movie, right? Maybe before, like, when Brad Pitt's like got his like plantation. Is that New Orleans?
Yeah. I believe that is.
For some reason, I assumed that.
But the modern day city that they're in is
San Fran.
Yeah, because it starts out and it shows like the Golden Gate Bridge. And
right. Yeah. You know what it was? Is I think I was confusing it with. Isn't there like a part where he like runs into Lestat and Lestat's kind of hiding inside a little like decrepit mansion? Is that New Orleans or is that also San Fran?
I don't remember, to be honest.
But well, anywho, but that opening where it's just kind of like going through like the city at night, and there's this kind of like choir orchestrated music playing.
Man, the music is so good.
It's just like it's just setting you up for like what's going to just be like a great a great movie. I mean, I bet it probably got a few like Oscar noms for like effects and things like that. But it kind of is like, it's kind of like an Oscar kind of vampire movie. Like, just horror movies in general kind of get snubbed for Oscars. But when you kind of think about it, like it kind of has a lot of the traits of like, it's kind of this kind of like a biopic, kind of covering like just generations of just these different eras, which, kind of is like the tropes of a lot of like Oscar kind of movies. And I don't know. Yeah, it's well written. It's well acted. Like everything is very believable about the movie.
Yeah.
The only part of the movie that's maybe like tonally a little bit different and a little bit cheesy, and it doesn't ruin the movie, but it's maybe like the very end.
I like that too, though. Actually, it ends on a Guns N' Roses cover of "Sympathy for the Devil."
Yeah,
which I think is like fucking awesome. It brings you right back into the modern times, which is very cool, because again, I like this movie does such a great job. I love it when a movie does a great job of just drawing me in and then sweeping me away, and that's exactly what this movie does. It takes you back in time, across a couple centuries or whatever, and you go on this journey with these characters. You get to see them live their lives. You get to see them live throughout all these different time periods and stuff. And then it brings you back to ending up where we began. Ah, man.
And it's very just, it's rewatchable. Like you can just watch it a bunch of times and just not get sick of it. At least, I don't know. I don't.
Again, every time I watch it, like it's hard to not sit through it. Like I find Star Wars: A New Hope does this too. Every time I like turn it on, once like that rebel blockade runner or whatever, it goes flying over the thing and the Star Destroyer is coming over. It's like I just get sucked right in, and next thing you know, I'm like half an hour into the movie and I'm like, geez, I just wanted to watch like some scene for reference, and now I'm like watching the whole movie. But this is exactly how it goes with Interview with the Vampire.
I'd known about Interview with the Vampire for a long time because my mom had a bunch of the books, and then she also had a really thick graphic novel of Interview with the Vampire. And I don't know if the director like used that graphic novel as a bit of a storyboarding structure for it, but it's like when I was as a kid, I remember like flipping through the pages, and they cast the movie really well, because like when you look at the graphic novel, like the girl, like Claudia, like it's like she looks like Kirsten Dunst.
Yeah,
and I don't know if Louis looked that much like Brad Pitt, but like Lestat actually was, not that far off from like, Tom Cruise's. And I didn't really read the graphic novel. I was just kind of still kind of young at the time, but I remember just kind of like skimming through it. And yeah, I mean, it had a lot of like the qualities that the movie had. So the movie just really seemed to have gone like the tone right.
Yeah, I remember the author, Anne Rice. I think that's her name, right?
Yeah.
She had quite a lot of praise for Tom Cruise as Lestat.
Well,
and I think she wasn't too pleased about him being cast.
No, and she was very open about that. Like she was basically like crapping on the whole thing. And they were like, well, wait, you haven't seen the movie yet.
Yeah.
And then, because she had very particular people like in mind. And to be fair, like at that particular time, especially with Tom Cruise's career, I could understand why she would feel that way.
Yeah, for sure. He wouldn't have been an obvious choice. Yeah. And
I actually think it's one of his best performances.
Me too. Yeah. Me too. Definitely. It's because Tom Cruise, I mean, I guess he's done a number of like character roles, but that's definitely one of them. And it's probably, he's only done a few. There's like Born on the 4th of July and I don't know, a handful of others. But he's not like a character actor. He often plays, a version of himself kind of. But in that he's fantastic and he disappears right into the role. Yeah, no, he's really good. I would agree that it's probably one of his best roles.
It's also got I love the subtle makeup, like the vampire makeup that Stan Winston did.
Oh, he did that too.
Yeah,
right?
which you'd think it's almost like a waste of his skills because Stan Winston is so into doing such crazy Terminators and
it is pretty
dinosaurs. Subtle. Yeah, but it's just there's that like slight little like just kind of like when they haven't eaten for a while and you see like the little like veins just kind of underneath the skin. Just stuff like that and
their eyes obviously are like these creepy eyes. The pale veiny skin. But they also he probably also did some of the effects, like for instance the charred bodies, I would imagine.
I'm sure of it. Yeah.
All that type of stuff. So there is some stuff in there that's still
well, even like when Tom Cruise kind of they kind of attempt to kill him and he kind of comes back and he's even kind of more rotten looking. Right. Yeah, that was pretty elaborate. Yeah. I'm just checking here. So it was nominated for 2 Oscars, one for Best Art Direction, Set Decoration, and one for Best Score. Oh, okay. I'm glad it was nominated for the score and
me too.
And actually both of those. Yeah. I mean, that was 94, so I mean there was probably a lot of stiff competition that year. I mean, I don't know if they were competing with Forrest Gump and Pulp Fiction that year, but they might have been.
Yeah, that was so they were nominated. They didn't win either of these.
Right. But, yeah. Nope. Never you never get the respect for the horror. Not from the Oscars. Yeah. Not unless you're Silence of the Lambs. But but no, those are exceptions. Interview with the Vampire. It's just so disappointing that they couldn't have continued that franchise with that cast and that director, because even the tone of the ending, right, which is it's a little bit tonally, it's different, but I think it was almost perfectly done to perfectly shift into what the tone of the next movie would have been had they had continued doing them.
Yeah, well, you were telling me a little bit about that. So what?
So the next one would have been or at least chronologically by the books. The first book is Interview with the Vampire. I'm pretty sure the second book is Lestat the Vampire, and I mean, I don't honestly. I haven't read any of these books, so I mean, I don't know if Louis in it at all, or Louis might be. It's kind of like each book is sort of through a different vampire's point of view, and so the Lestat one is based way more on modern time, because I guess you more or less kind of got the Lestat history from the Interview with the Vampire. So the second book is about Lestat, kind of I think the book was written maybe in like the late 70s or 80s, so he'd be like an 80s rock star who kind of like, in the way that in the Interview with the Vampire, there's like the theater of vampires, where it's kind of vampires pretending to be actors, pretending to be vampires.
Oh, okay.
I think it was kind of like this similar thing where, he was kind of like a vampire pretending to be a rock star who's pretending to be a vampire.
Yeah. Well, it's interesting, right? Because you think like, okay, this is a person who has to sort of integrate into society somehow.
Yeah.
What would they do?
But I guess you couldn't be able to have that career for long, right? Because after even if you went for 20 years, after a certain point, the jig would be up. They'd be like, he's not aging.
Yeah. What would you do? Fake your own death or something? Which you could do quite easily as a vampire,
Yeah, maybe
crash some drive a car off a cliff or something, or
Yeah.
crash a plane.
But there was, I guess, the kind of unofficial sequel to Interview with the Vampire, which I guess is Queen of the Damned, which does have the Lestat character in it. It's just...
and where would that have fallen in the series of books?
I think Queen of the Damned was maybe like the third or fourth book. It might have even been the second one. For some reason, I feel like Lestat is the second book, but it could be Queen of the Damned. There's also a book called Armand, which is, based on the Antonio Banderas character. There might even be a book that's focused on like the interviewer and about his kind of story about kind of becoming a vampire.
Well, because I thought that there was one that maybe follows up, because you know how Interview with the Vampire ends with him, he ends up in the car with Lestat.
Mm-hmm.
And I seem to recall hearing that there's a whole story of Lestat basically taking him on as his new sort of apprentice or whatever.
Well,
right? Because that guy leaves the interview being like, I want you to do this to me now,
I would imagine that he's a key character in the Lestat book,
probably,
where he's a rock star. But I don't know. It's I don't know how familiar you are with the director Neil Jordan, but I think he's a bit of an underrated guy who deserves more love and I wish he was making more of these kind of movies, because he made another movie. He made a werewolf movie that also, again, I don't know if it fully qualifies as Gothic horror. I didn't really put it on my top 10 list, but I kind of put it underneath that as kind of a pseudo Gothic horror one. And it's called Company of Wolves. And it's kind of like Neil Jordan's kind of take on Little Red Riding Hood, but with a much more of a werewolf emphasis.
I'm just looking here. He actually put out a movie last year. This movie called Marlowe. In late 1930s Bay City, a brooding, down on his luck detective is hired to find the ex-lover of a glamorous heiress.
Yeah. Well, that would be Philip. That would be the famous Philip Marlowe character, right? So.
Oh, okay. Yeah, and this has Liam Neeson.
Yeah, well, it's
Diane Kruger.
I love his horror stuff, but actually, I think he leans the most towards kind of doing like crime kind of thrillers and stuff like that. But
it's got a good cover, a good poster.
Okay, yeah, no, he's really good with the visuals. And again, like Interview with the Vampire and Company of Wolves have great posters. He also did a horror
Thief from 2002.
Yeah, he did a horror comedy called High Spirits, which another kind of childhood horror comedy that I watched a lot as a kid. Didn't know that these were all made by the same guy.
I should definitely check out more of his work.
Yeah, The Crying Game was a famous one of his.
I was going to say.
I think did he do a movie called Mona Lisa? Or that might just have. I think that just had the actress from The Crying Game. I don't think it would be a Neil Jordan movie.
Oh yeah, Mona Lisa.
He did do that. Okay, that was
1986.
Yeah.
And The Company of Wolves was right before that. That was his second movie then. He also, I guess, made the U2 music video "Red Hill Mining Town."
Okay. Yeah, he made a movie in the late 90s called The Butcher Boy, which is it's not really a horror movie, but it's kind of almost just like a creepy drama.
A lot of these movies look intriguing to me. Like
they
High
are,
Spirits.
Yeah.
Have you seen High Spirits?
Well, that was the one I was saying. Like that was like the childhood horror comedy that I watched a million times. And no, I really I honestly, like High Spirits. You could, other than the fact that it's modern times, like it's set in an old castle dealing with old ghosts, and it's a lot of fun. Like it's what could I say about that? I mean, okay, Steve Guttenberg's in it, but it's also got Liam Neeson, so that probably explains Liam Neeson's connections with Neil Jordan.
Yeah,
but it's I don't know, Peter. That was High Spirits was my introduction to Peter O'Toole, and
for most people it was Lawrence of Arabia, but for you, it was
it's like try showing a 3-hour Lawrence of Arabia to a little kid and see how that goes.
I actually think I watched that when I was probably about 8 or 9 years old.
I did watch it fairly young, yeah, but I remember it. I was like, it was long.
Get these old classics to show us. We watched like Patton when I was.
Oh, I still need to see Patton. I haven't seen that yet.
Ben-Hur, I grew up watching. Spartacus.
I haven't seen Ben-Hur. Did see Spartacus, yeah. But But yeah. Well, while this was something I guess I was talking to you about earlier that maybe while we're talking about Gothic horror, we can briefly talk about, and that was the fact that I was having a bit of a conversation with you about, whether something like The Crow would be considered like a Gothic, movie, because it's got a lot of the Gothic atmosphere and feel. It's very dark, but it's that conundrum we had earlier where it's like, can a modern set movie really count as a Gothic film?
Yeah, I tend to think not, and it's like you would get a little bit too broad. You have to kind of draw the parameters, I guess, of what qualifies. But I mean, like clearly The Crow has a lot of Gothic sort of elements. Well, you could
it would be almost neat to. I know that they're planning on remaking The Crow with I think Bill Skarsgård, but like there's certain movies where I'm almost like we usually try to like update classic stories, but rarely do we kind of think like, hey, what if we rebooted The Crow to be an actual Gothic horror movie?
Yeah.
Like set it in like 1860.
I honestly,
it would work.
Yeah, I like the idea of doing that with a lot of things. Like take a movie and put it back in a more historical context rather than doing the modern updated version. It's like, hey, make it into a period piece.
Like I love the old black and white Universal horror movies, and I'm like, oh, imagine if you took some of like the later, like what would it be like if you took like Michael Myers and made it in the style of like a 1932 Universal horror movie, or an old like what would Freddy Krueger be like in like the film noir era or something?
This is where like I know earlier, not on the podcast, but just conversing, we were talking about how a lot of people say, oh, there's no fresh ideas, there's no original ideas. And it's like, just take anything that exists and put it in some different context or put it in a different time period or combine it with some other genre. Yeah. Like the possibilities are endless, and there's so much stuff that really hasn't been done.
Yeah. I think the thing
or
is
at
like,
least not done to any great length. Like
I think when people pitch a lot of these ideas, I think a lot of people just, again, like they just don't have the creative vision to see it. And so they'll just shrug it off being like, oh, that sounds stupid, I wouldn't want to watch that. It's like, well, maybe the idea of it sounds stupid until you see the execution. And if it's done well, you'd realize, here's kind of a good example of, this wasn't exactly like a movie that was like rebooted, but, there's a Call of Cthulhu movie. Are you familiar with Cthulhu, like from H.P. Lovecraft?
That's like some sort of cult religion type of thing, I think.
Yeah, well,
I don't know too much about
Cthulhu, there's like a kind of a Cthulhu worshippers, but he's kind of part of these ancient ones, these like kind of old gods who've been like sleeping at the bottom of the ocean. And they're just like these giant, like I think they're kind of, think like Godzilla size, maybe even larger.
Oh, okay.
And Cthulhu is usually designed as this, he's basically got like a squid head with like tentacles, but then he's also got this body with wings, but the face is, essentially almost like an octopus kind of squid head. And the idea is kind of, it's part of like the cosmic horror where just it's such this phenomenal, like ancient evil thing that like, if you even see it, like you just kind of, you go instantly insane. Oh. And like I'm like, where's my great Gothic horror Cthulhu movie?
Yeah.
And it turns out that they actually did decide to, there was like a sort of like low budget indie movie that decided to do the Call of Cthulhu in the style of like a black and white silent film. And I'm still been wanting to watch it, but from some of the stuff I saw of it, I'm like, oh, this is actually like a really neat way to do this. And it'd be kind of neat to do more movies like this. Like, I don't know if they always need to be silent films, but I'm like, just the idea of like kind of like getting like an idea and being like, let's just make this as like an old fashioned 1920s or 1930s movie. It just kind of makes it different, as opposed to if they made a modern day Cthulhu movie, it would be this, I'm sure it'd be an impressive looking CGI thing, but it would just look like every other kind of movie monster of these days.
Yeah. Well, and I do think that there's a lot of creativity in terms of design and production and depiction when you do aim to do some of that stuff with practical effects, or at least with partial practical effects. Yeah. Where it's almost like the knee-jerk reaction is to lean into CGI. Okay, we're going to create this character that doesn't exist. Well, we're going to do a CGI version of it. And that's that. But it's like, what if you just think about ways in which you might depict a believable, practical creature of this nature that you're trying to bring to life.
Did you ever see the movie? I think it's called Attack the Block or Attack on the Block. Does that sound familiar at all? It's not like a Gothic horror movie, so I won't talk about it for long. But the monsters in it, it was such like a simple design. It was like basically they just kind of made like a fursuit, just like black fur, like really, really basic, like just enough to kind of like create the shape of like, if you're in it, you can kind of like run after somebody. And then it just kind of had these like, kind of like glowing kind of like teeth, just kind of these like snapping glowing teeth. And that's like all it was. And it was probably like a ridiculously cheap costume to make, but it was like very effective just because it was practical. You're like, oh, that actually is like a furry thing kind of like chasing
it's a thing
you
in front of the camera, right?
Yeah.
I think that always makes such a difference. Of course, if you're trying to be too ambitious and it ends up being really cheesy, well, then that can be a problem. But even, sorry, even the crossover of effects, right? Because you can have some shots that are CG if you want, and then other shots that are practical. And I think that tends to yield the best results. Because then you kind of blend the line of where people aren't sure which ones are practical and which ones are CG. Yeah.
For any like filmmakers listening, I mean, obviously, you know, you're dealing with your own budgetary constraints and might not always be able to, you know, make a practical creature or monster. But if you can manage to like just to do that, like we'd really recommend just the trick is to just get like a really kind of, you know, a basic practical suit. And, you know, I don't know if the jaw just kind of like flaps up and down, like that's kind of where you just use CGI to kind of tweak those little kind of features that maybe just don't seem right. And that's kind of where I feel like there's like a real like kind of like winning combination where you're kind of like CGIing the small things and the practical effect that just didn't fully work.
Right.
You know?
Yeah. That reminds me a little bit of, did you ever see that Where the Wild Things Are movie that Spike Jonze directed?
Yeah, I wasn't a fan.
I was not a fan either. I was very disappointed by it. I was so excited and very disappointed. But
the book was like the children's book was like kind of really important, like growing up with that. Like my dad was a big fan and I grew up with it. So I had like toys. Like I basically was Max when I was a kid. Okay. And then that movie came out and I was just like, this is like the weirdest, most hipstery, bizarre mesh of different things, and none of it worked. And I
did not like it much at all.
No.
But I was just mentioning it because they did practical costumes, but then they used CG to do like the mouth moving and the eyes blinking and stuff like that.
Yeah.
And you know, I don't know. It's I'm trying to remember how I felt about that watching it. I think for one thing, I just didn't like the voices of the characters.
That was a big problem with it. They got like very like well-known actors who are not voice actors.
Well, and they just sound like too human too. Like when I think of the Wild Things, I don't think of them as being these people who speak.
You don't think
like
of
humans.
Meryl Streep and Forrest Whitaker?
No.
I'm pretty sure
I
that
think of like
those
these
were
like
voices.
groaning, grunting kind of like characters that communicate more so through their physical expression rather than...
I'm amazed that they just didn't really seem to bother using any type of voice filter to at least add an effect to make it a little bit more gravelly or something. It was just I don't know. It was just like you close your eyes and it's like Meryl Streep's like a mom doing like story time.
Wait, was
or
Meryl
something.
Streep really doing? I don't think she did a voice,
maybe it wasn't Meryl Streep. It was someone like Meryl Streep. It was a Meryl Streep like actress, but maybe that was too prestigious for her. I don't know why I'm thinking Meryl Streep. Now I'm questioning a Forrest Whitaker.
Catherine O'Hara was in the movie, but I think she plays the mom.
Oh, see, that's weird because Catherine O'Hara is actually like really known for a lot of her voice work.
Well, maybe no. I think. Oh, okay. Yeah, Catherine O'Hara was one of the voice actors. Yeah, so Forrest Whitaker was one of them. Pepita Emmerichs, Max Pfeiffer. The hell.
Okay.
I know, like one of the guys was.
I guess I was confusing Meryl Streep with Catherine O'Hara.
Catherine Keener was the mom.
Right.
Yeah, James Gandolfini was one of the voices.
Which sounds like that would have been a kind of a making
Paul Dano
sense
was
thing,
one
but
of them too.
Yeah, that's a terrible choice.
Yeah, no, I don't think I don't think it worked well at all. I think just giving them human voices in general was a bad approach.
Yeah, no, like you would have been better off just like hiring like the cast of like the Transformers cartoon and just get them to like be the monster. Like just there's a real art form to
I actually when I was in
voice work.
Yeah, when I was in film school, we had to for our audio production class, we had to create a radio play. And so my radio play was a telling of where the wild things are. And so I had to record like sounds for the monsters and stuff. And I had to go like, please, we'll eat you. Don't go. We'll eat you up. We love you so. And
no wonder you hated the movie. You were like, not only do I know what's wrong, but I even did it better.
Yeah. Well, honestly, I think that I did do it better. I still don't think I did it great, but I think I did it better.
Yeah.
Like
and didn't get paid the millions of dollars that they did for it.
Well, they seemed more like those monsters. It's like when you're flipping through that book and you're looking there and you're imagining what they sound like. I don't know. The depiction that I had was closer to what I'd had in mind than what we ended up with in the movie.
Is it safe to say that Where the Wild Things Are is your least favorite Gothic horror film?
Yeah. Well, I mean, now here's the debate. Can Where the Wild Things Are be classified as a Gothic horror?
No.
Yeah, okay. Well, that's a short debate, ladies and gentlemen.
Yeah. But it definitely has the potential to be made into a horror version.
Oh, fuck. It probably should have been.
Yeah.
Like, it was so tame. It was so...
Again, it's like, not that I want to, like... there's so much stuff that Tim Burton's done in the last 20 years that's disappointing. I don't want to just throw everything at him, but... And I don't know, Spike Jonze has made some good stuff, but I almost do wonder if...
well, it was kind of a weird... He wasn't, like, the type of director that you'd immediately think of.
I almost wonder if he was, like, pressured into it, like... Unless it was like a childhood book of his.
I think he really wanted to do it, actually. I remember watching interviews, and I'm pretty sure he...
Yeah.
Was
See, the funny thing is, it's not that I want to stick on Where the Wild Things Are for very long, but if you want to see the best adaptation of the book, there's actually like a 1980s opera of Where the Wild Things Are, and the sets and costumes were designed by Maurice Sendak, who illustrated and wrote the book.
Yeah, really.
And you watch that, and other than the fact, even though it's bizarre because they're all just like, ooh, like they're all literally singing opera inside these costumes, but it's somehow it just kind of adds to the surrealness of everything. And yeah, you're like literally watching like the live adaptation of the book. And I'm kind of like, oh, it would have been neat if they kind of did the movie more like that, where almost like the set pieces kind of almost clearly kind of look like cardboard cutouts, but also like very much in the style of the artwork from the book.
Yeah. That probably would have been the way to go. Kind of theatrical, hey?
Yeah.
That's really interesting to hear. I had no idea that existed.
It's a really kind of weird, obscure, like, I bet you could probably find some of it on YouTube, but it's probably not easy to find like the entire opera. But I remember I kind of saw some of it as a kid and I was just sort of like, whoa. Yeah, no, they should have done, the Wild Things should have been almost more like a Jim Henson design where like they tried their best to make the head, the faces. Mm-hmm. And then you do like, when their eyes blink, that's when you add like a CGI eyelid, as opposed to maybe designing a complicated animatronic eyelid device and little things to make the mouth move a little bit smoother.
The other thing is, again, kind of going back to the blending of techniques, is you could have used the animatronics for, say, close-up shots, and then used kind of these unexpressive versions that aren't so complicated for the stunts. And then, like have different costumes for different purposes, right?
You've seen Jim Henson's Labyrinth? David Bowie?
Yeah.
There's
wait, Labyrinth. No, I actually haven't seen Labyrinth. I've been meaning to watch that for a long time.
Okay,
I was thinking of a Legend.
Right. There's a character in Labyrinth that is like a big, hairy, overgrown, almost kind of like a Wild Thing character, but like just far more detailed and like expressionistic in its face. Yeah. Like it's more realistic. It looks more like a real thing. And I'm like, well, if that's what you could do in 1985, I'm like, there's no excuse. Like, of course, like they could have done like fully animatronic Where the Wild Things Are if they wanted to.
Totally. Yeah, I think so, man.
animatronic in the face. I mean, it would make sense to have a person in the suit. But yeah, just look at what we did with like the Ninja Turtles way back in the day.
Well,
that was
yeah.
way more complicated than having the Where the Wild Things Are. Just making those faces articulate.
You would think, right? And again, some of this stuff, like, I don't know because I don't know exactly what's involved in creating it, but I would tend to think that it would be more complicated.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, should we dive into our top 10?
Yeah, let's do it. I'm sure the viewers are aching to find out our top 10.
You keep saying, or we actually keep saying viewers, even though nobody's watching this.
Well, they're viewing with their ears.
That's right.
Yeah.
Yeah. I'm going to put, so my number 10 for Gothic Horror is Where the Wild Things Are.
Well, I'm glad it's at number 10 at least. It's not
I'm not
any,
gonna
if
lie,
it was anywhere farther down.
I actually only have 8 on my list. Like,
Okay.
again, I will say, as much as I love this genre, the aesthetic and stuff, I haven't watched as much of it as I should. And whatever, this episode is going to be inspiration for me to go watch more of these movies. And hopefully all the listeners will be inspired to check out some of it too. Maybe our lists will give them some ideas, or maybe they'll go find some stuff themselves.
Yeah. Well, and even my list, it's this one was a bit complicated. I was trying to really try and find like, you know, the truest cases of Gothic horror, and sometimes I had some stuff where I'm like, oh, like this feels like this should be on the list, but maybe some people might not truly view it as a pure Gothic horror thing. So, but I don't know, man. Hopefully, I will maybe introduce you to a few Gothic movies that you'll.
Well, I've written down a couple as you've been talking about them. So
okay.
But why don't you start with your number 10 there? So I only have 8 on this list. So you can do your 10 and 9, and then I'll pick up.
Okay. So I might actually even have to change my number 10, because my original number 10, I kind of broke the rule that we established, which is that a Gothic horror, needs to, be a period piece. My original number 10 was a movie called Cemetery Man. And it's got a lot of very Gothic visuals, but it's set in basically modern. I mean, it's filmed in Italy, but I think it's actually supposed to be England. Maybe I will save that for another episode, because I can fit this into the zombie category or just possessed undead category. I won't stick with this movie. Just reading this by candlelight. You know what I'm going to do? I'm going to replace it with a Roger Corman, Edgar Allan Poe movie. I'm going to put 2 of those on my list.
Okay.
So, you know what? I've talked a bit about The Raven. Maybe I should just put The Raven as number 10.
Sure.
And I don't know if there's even much more I should say about it.
Yeah, I mean, we talked about it quite a bit.
Yeah.
The Raven, ladies and gentlemen.
Yeah. That was
1963, you said? Go check that out. Like, that's worth watching. It's early Jack Nicholson. It's got all those other guys. Like, what a stocked cast.
Yeah. It was, that was like my intro to them all. And, funny enough, I mean, that was probably if my first introduction to Gothic horror was The Count from Sesame Street, my second introduction to Gothic horror very well might have been The Raven.
Yeah.
So that's quite a leap from that one to the second. But if you're looking for something that I don't know, maybe if you want to that you can maybe get your young kids to watch, I'm pretty sure that they can handle The Raven.
Yeah. I'm finally gonna watch that this month.
Yeah.
I'll definitely make a point of it. Because again, so many of these things, like, I've just been meaning to watch for a long time, and it's like, all right, do it now.
Mm-hmm.
So what's your number 9?
My number 9 was going to be Fall of the House of Usher. So that's the other Roger Corman one I'm putting on the list that we talked a little bit about. Maybe we didn't go too much into the plot of it. So it's, I'm trying to remember it now. From what I remember, it's essentially like Vincent Price's character. He's got very sensitive hearing. And then I think like later on, there's like these kind of like booming sounds that are heard that are torturing him. And I don't know, somewhere towards the end, I just kind of have a vision of almost like the whole house, kind of like the mansion just kind of like sinking into the ground. I mainly just kind of put it on the list just because of all of those old Roger Corman ones. It just kind of seemed like one of like the darker ones. Like they didn't yet know that they were going to do this franchise. And so it's almost like they kind of went all out with this first one. So just had like there's a lot of fog and mist in this one. Vincent Price kind of plays it a lot more straight than some of the other ones, where normally in the other ones, even if they're like serious horror movies, Vincent Price is always kind of playful. He's kind of a bit of the comic relief. But in this one, he plays it fairly straight. So I don't know if there's that much more that I could say about this one, but I think it's a kind of a good way for people if they want to get into those Edgar Allan Poe movies from the 60s. This was kind of the first one that Roger Corman did. So I don't know if you're kind of like me. It's kind of fun to sort of, watch them in order and sort of see the progression from movie to movie. And so, yeah, I think this is a good one to kind of start off with for those Edgar Allan Poe movies.
Cool.
Yeah.
Yeah, that sounds fun for me to check out. Well, on that point, number 8, I'll come in with my number 8 here. My number 8 is The Witch, or The Witch. I don't know how you want to pronounce it, but it was that Jason Eggers movie that came out back in, and I think this qualifies as Gothic horror, but yeah, it was that Jason Eggers movie that came out probably in the early to mid 2010s.
Yeah.
And it's really like a very raw movie. I think that's like what he does quite well. He tends to do that. He has this very raw style with how
it might be my favorite of his 3 movies.
Yeah, it probably is for me, although I actually didn't see the Lighthouse still. I'm meaning to watch that for a long ass time. But yeah, I mean, I think it's just great. It's super creepy. Like the horror from it doesn't depend on jump scares and stuff. It's just like horrific imagery and situations and stuff. And that's what I think is quite effective and unique in this day and age about it.
It has a lot of iconic stuff in it where I remember when I first watched it, I think I was like kind of depressed for a little while about how it just seemed like it had been a little while since there was some truly iconic horror movies coming out. And
sorry, I keep saying Jason Eggers. I don't know why.
It's Robert Eggers.
Robert Eggers.
Yeah.
Brother.
Is Jason Eggers his brother? Maybe.
I don't know.
Are they writing them together? The Egger brothers.
Jason Eggers. Where am I getting this from? Well, he was additional crew on Iron Will.
There you go.
I don't know where I got Jason from. Anyway,
but well, it's because probably it's all that Friday the 13th talk from the other podcast. That Jason, it's just stuck in our heads.
Yeah, I guess so.
Yeah, I mean, I remember like the only other movie that had come out maybe like a little bit before the Witch that I felt was like like a very kind of iconic horror movie was The Conjuring. And then when The Witch came along, I was just sort of like, yeah, there's just stuff in here that I'm like, this is just going to be remembered. And even I was almost even kind of expecting to see almost like parodies of stuff in The Witch because it just seemed very iconic. Like I just that's kind of I think how I am with like a lot of movies that I really like is it's almost like you just have these flashes of little moments, and the better the movie, the more flashes of things you can think of. And with The Witch, there's a lot. Like I always think about the disappearance of the baby when the girls, Anya Taylor-Smith, she's doing like a kind of like a little peekaboo game with the baby.
Anya Taylor-Joy.
Oh, who's Anya Taylor-Smith? You're terrible, man. We just keep messing up the names.
We keep fucking up these names, man.
Yeah.
Fuck, I'm sorry. Okay, everybody, I'm sorry that I'm hacking up a storm here.
Is there an Anya Taylor-Smith? She's going to marry a Smith. And she will become Anya Taylor-Smith, and then everyone I'll have the final laugh.
Marry? Will Smith. Maybe she's going to marry Will Smith ever since, I don't know.
It's not the most unbelievable thing. I don't think that marriage of his is going to be lasting much longer. But yeah, I think about the scene where she's doing like kind of like the peekaboo game with the baby, and she's like, closing her eyes.
Oh, yeah.
And then, she opens them and it's just, it's gone.
Yeah.
And, that just was like a very kind of, chilling moment. And then,
yeah, imagine if that happened, right? You're like playing with somebody's baby and.
It's that thing where it's like both like this horrific thing happened, and you're also sort of like, this doesn't even make any sense. How is someone going to even believe this story?
Yeah, you're just confused. Shit, it just disappeared.
What did?
Oh, no, I'm just saying.
Oh, sorry. Yeah, you were looking at your phone. I thought maybe.
No.
Yeah, but yeah. I mean, I don't know. To be honest, so here's the thing that I was really impressed with The Witch. Now, The Witch is a little bit newer.
Oh, hey, you know what's interesting? Just a quick side note. Robert Eggers directed a short Telltale Heart version.
Oh,
as like his second short film, I guess.
Or you know what? That sounds familiar. Film. Yeah, I think I was trying to hunt down some of his shorts because like all of his movie, he definitely has a very specific interest in things. Like, did he even do? Yeah. Did he do like a little like Hansel and Gretel short?
Yeah, that was his first one here.
So he's definitely a fan of the dark fairy tales. Like, I don't know if that guy's ever going to make a contemporary film.
Yeah, I mean, he likes to work in kind of historical.
Yeah, and I'm fine with that. I don't know if I'd want a modern day Robert Eggers movie. I almost feel like it might defeat the point.
The need for it.
Yeah, but I mean, I'm sure if he has a really good premise for a modern one, like
I just hope he keeps on doing like original films, right? Because all of these are original from what I understand. Like The Northman, The Lighthouse, The Witch. And
I think
I don't think they're based on anything.
I don't think so. I think what it could just be is I think he takes things that he's generally just interested in. Like he probably was just doing a ton of research and just witch folklore in general. And then from that, he kind of comprised his own little story out of that. Yeah. And sort of same thing, I think, with The Northman. Probably he was doing a lot of research on Vikings and just took the things that he was most interested in. Although you could say that The Northman, there's a little bit of Hamlet in The Northman. That may be the closest thing to a bit of a loose adaptation. But I think also he's a big fan of the languages, like because all three of those movies, they just seem to have this very authentic old timey language. True. But the thing that like really kind of shocked me a bit about The Witch, where I was kind of like, oh, this guy's not messing around. Anything can kind of happen in this movie because it happened pretty early on. But it's kind of I call it the baby goulash scene, where you kind of find out what happens to the baby. And you're just sort of like, oh, okay, they're going there. Like, they're just fully taking out the baby. And then, because the rule is kind of like with a lot of horror movies, like, you don't go after the kids. You don't go after the family pet. And unless the movie does. And you're just sort of like, oh, okay, it's going to be one of those horror movies. And so that's kind of...
You could back off from the mic a little bit. Just my bad. Maybe peeking a little bit. When
I'm talking about baby goulash, I get a little excited there. But yeah. So that was just like a really like just brutal kind of, I mean, you don't see the murder itself, but you see the aftermath and it's just the idea of it all.
Well, again, yeah. And I mean, like we were talking a bit earlier in regards to Dracula, movies that go, if it's a dark movie, like it goes to a dark place, and depicts things and shows things.
There's one shot in The Witch that to me, I'm like, that might almost be the quintessential witch shot in maybe cinema.
Is that the one with the naked lady who's just like crouched over and like...
No, but I think it might be not long after that. It's basically kind of not long after the baby goulash sequence, which I guess is kind of around the naked witch scene. But there's a part where basically it's like she's done her thing, and then it's just like a straight cut to kind of like the back of the witch in like a dark, maybe even red shawl. And she's just kind of like walking towards this full moon that's in the background. And it's kind of in slow motion. And I'm just like, oh my God, that is just the essence of a witchy moment right there. And so...
Yeah, totally. You got to appreciate like being able to because that's almost reminiscent of... How would you put it? Classic imagery that you'd get of a witch riding a broomstick over the moon or whatever, that type of thing, right? But putting it into this more raw, realistic, historical, brutal kind of style, and recreating that in a raw, realistic, brutal style, you know what I mean? It's like if you're going to take like the classic children's image of like a little cartoon witch flying over the moon. Yeah. It's like, how would you do that if you were going to make it like really dark and realistic. And
Yeah,
whatnot.
it was almost like it felt almost like I'd already seen this image, but I hadn't. It was just that kind of iconic where I'm like, oh, they just really captured this little moment.
Yeah, and it was kind of a
really well.
recreation of other things that you had seen, but in again a different style in a way.
And I don't
But
know if
that was great.
I don't know if they planned for that shot to be as effective, at least to someone like me, as it was. Like they were probably just sort of like, oh, we'll have a little insert shot. Let's just get a little shot of her like walking away, towards the skyline or whatever. We'll shoot it in slow motion. And for whatever reason, it was just very effective. It was just this little simple shot, but I'm just sort of like, yeah, that's all. I'm so glad they didn't, try to Michael Bay it where it's like, oh, let's do a 360 shot where the camera spins around the witch.
See, this is one of the things that I think I have an issue with modern films is the kind of the limitlessness of the camera movement.
Yeah.
I feel like
right?
it's so over the top these days. And when I watch that's one of the refreshing things about watching older movies where it's like they're depending a lot more on the composition.
Yeah.
And creating an effective composition. And maybe it's just a still shot or with very subtle movement or whatever. But it's a beautiful composition and it's effective and it's telling a story and
it's usually creepier. It's almost like what modern horror movies are doing is like they're using the techniques of action movies for horror films.
Well, and almost trying to like hide areas where they're lacking, right? Like it's kind of like if you want to make a fight scene with bad choreography look somewhat decent, then shake the camera around and have it be a tight close up and then
rapid like half-second cuts.
Yeah.
And
but like it's way better, I think, when you pull the camera back and like set it up and a person can actually look at the shot and take it in and enjoy it.
And it weirdly seems more cinematic, and yet technically there's less being done.
Well, that's the funny thing, right? It's more it's simpler.
Yep.
But I mean, you don't have to have this crazy techno crane hovering rig or drone shot. I don't know. But it's like we've gotten all these tools at our disposal, but they end up kind of getting overused and maybe just used inappropriately. I don't know.
Yeah. Like if I was going to see a play, I don't need to like sit on somebody's lap in my seat. And then when the play starts getting intense, the guy whose lap I'm sitting on just starts like vibrating and jostling me around. And I'm going to be like, oh, wow, like I can really feel the intensity now of this play more. No, it's like the content and the storytelling should be enough. Like I think there's, when you can get away with the shaky camera and like the rapid fast cutting, that's when you're the first person doing it because no other movie has done it and you're trying something different. That's when it's kind of okay. But then every other movie does the same thing and you're like, oh, okay, this is just the modern language of action sequences now or intense sequences. And it's just boring. It's people just want something different. Yeah.
But and as I say, like I really like the idea of being able to actually sit and watch a shot and look at a shot and take it in, Yeah. I feel like it's so rare that you get that these days where it's like you can just sit there for a few seconds and appreciate a shot being on screen for more than a few seconds.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I definitely wish there was more of that simplicity. And, maybe we'll apply that more to our own filmmaking. I know I'd personally like to.
Yeah. I'd hope that filmmakers kind of get that sort of style out of their system early on, just the whole shaky camera stuff. And then they kind of eventually, hopefully they look at it and realize, oh, even they don't like it. And then they'll hopefully mature into a storyteller that's going to just, do more kind of sort of in a way simplistic conservative shots, but they'll realize like, this is just better. I don't know. I guess it's a personal, it's all these things are kind of subjective, but most people that I seem to know, who are, real, movie lovers are not a fan of the shaky camera, rapid, fast edits. Like everyone's aware of what they're trying to pull off, which is just kind of like lazy, unplanned kind of blocking and stuff. Just taking it back though to The Witch, One thing that I don't know, I feel like you'd probably agree with. I think a lot of people feel this way is that oftentimes we're kind of annoyed by a lot of child actors, but the acting by the children in The Witch is maybe some of the best child acting I've seen. Like I'm especially kind of thinking about the boy, the son, and there's the kind of like it's his last scene. The Witch is, I know, kind of a newer movie, so hopefully our listeners aren't having things spoiled by this. But the boy basically kind of gets attacked by the witch, and then he barely makes it back home, and then he's kind of sick in bed, and he kind of just like abruptly has like a moment of lucidity and just has this like little like monologue. And I was just taken aback by like the performance. Like, yeah, it just kind of seemed like a kid like wise beyond his years. And I don't know if that's the credit of Robert Eggers, but
right. Yeah, it's hard to know sometimes how much of it is due to the directing versus the actual talent of the actor. But I mean, somehow it worked out for that movie. And it is always impressive when you get a kid who delivers a really convincing performance, especially if it's something that's difficult to do, right? Mm-hmm. It's like, okay, it's one thing if you're being a contemporary kid in a normal family and you're there to, like be the cute prop, essentially.
Yeah.
To do that convincingly is very different than trying to do like a traumatic scene convincingly.
Yeah.
Or something that's like, traumatic or spiritually, I don't know what the fuck I'm trying to say. Just get me out of this.
All I know is that I never saw that kid before, and I don't think I really saw that kid in anything afterwards. I was just like, who's this kid? Where did he come from? And I don't know. Yeah, I just took note of that because a lot of times like you see kids in horror movies and you want to just give them a nice slap, but I was like, yeah, just like there's not really anything about The Witch that felt kind of false to me. Like,
well, that's
they never went over the top.
He's got a lot of real like authenticity in the way that he makes movies.
Yeah.
And I have a lot of appreciation for that.
Yeah.
I don't necessarily love it the most because I actually quite like stylistic stuff. Obviously I love Tim Burton, theatrical design. I was talking a little bit about that earlier, but I do really appreciate the authenticity as a style for what it is and what it does. And
yeah,
I think he's awesome. I think he knocks it out of the park.
And I think the thing was The Witch was like his first feature length movie, and they probably had certain limitations with budgets and time and stuff, but it does seem like Roger Ebert, as he's making more movies and getting a little bit more money, I am noticing it does seem like the movies are slowly getting a little bit more stylistic. So hopefully, who knows? I don't think we'll ever see it on a Tim Burton level. Like, I don't think that's what he's interested or wants to do. But
yeah.
I think with the right projects and with the right money, I think we're going to see more stylistic stuff coming from him. Hopefully, but. I don't know. Yeah, should we move on to?
Yeah, we probably should. We've been talking about The Witch for quite a while.
Yeah,
but that's good. Eh? We got to talk and jump in and discuss that a little bit. That was one that we hadn't touched on before. What's your number 7?
My number 7 is, or is this my number 8?
I think you talked about your number 8 already.
Okay. So my number 7 is, I want to make sure so I should just say, like, there's 2 movies that I have on my list that I'm almost thinking of just switching out because I'm pretty sure, I'm almost positive that they're on your list.
Oh, okay.
So I'm wondering if I should just switch those out to just to guess a few other titles. But I'll say for number 7, I'm going to go with Mario Bava's Black Sabbath.
Ooh.
Now this is
you just love your Mario Bava. You keep bringing him up.
I do. It's weird because it's like I don't know. I'm just as much into Dario Argento, but he doesn't seem to be popping up as much. But
is he a horror director?
Yeah, there's kind of 3 main kind of horror Italian directors I think of, and it's Mario Bava, Dario Argento, and Lucio Fulci. But But yeah, with this one, it's because like, yeah, there's only really like 2 Gothic horror movies that Mario Bava did, but they're both, I find, kind of important to the genre. And so Black Sabbath, if you're wondering, that's the movie that actually inspired the band Black Sabbath. That's where they got their name from. Yeah.
Oh, that's cool.
And
I was going to say Black Sabbath. I've heard of that before.
yeah. And the reason I kind of put this on the list is because like this movie is almost like I've kind of been shitting a little bit on the Roger Corman, Edgar Allan Poe movies, and even the Hammer films. But Black Sabbath feels like those movies, but just done better. It's very colorful. I'm pretty sure it's Mario Bava's first color movie, and he kind of decided to kind of go all out. It's very colorful, and it's an anthology movie. So I've always loved anthology horror movies where, you get a whole bunch of little mini stories.
Yeah.
And they're all, from what I remember, they're all pretty decent. Also Boris Karloff is in it. And
gotta love Boris.
You gotta love Boris Karloff. And I don't know, I'm not even gonna really bother going into the individual mini stories, but just like if you guys like
it also features Mark Damon, Matt Damon's father. No, just kidding. I don't know. But there is a guy named Mark Damon who's in it. So maybe there's some relation. I don't know. Just by the way, if anybody wants to watch this movie, apparently it is streaming on Tubi. So
nice.
If you've got your free Tubi app there on your TV, go look up Black Sabbath, see if you can find it. Give it a watch.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, there's a lot of great horror stuff on Tubi for sure. And a
lot of old stuff, classic stuff too.
Mm-hmm. And it's an Italian movie, but I'm pretty sure it's all in English. And I don't know. It's just like a really fun, colorful little, I don't know if you guys are kind of considering the Edgar Allan Poe movies or Hammer, maybe check out Black Sabbath first. You might be pleasantly surprised there. I don't know. Yeah, I don't think I'll go too much deeper on it than that. It's been a bit of time since I've seen it.
Yeah, no, that's cool.
So.
Well, I just feel like fucking shit. Okay, so that's enough on that movie. Well, my number 7 was The Cabinet of Dr. Caligari, which I felt like was worth throwing in there. I mean, okay, well, let's consider. Do you consider this a Gothic horror film?
I think so.
It's,
I think so.
It's kind of like a fantasy.
Can that?
Well, I don't know. Let's talk about it. Why do you think of it as a Gothic horror film?
Well, mainly just the design of it all, right? Just like the look of it. It's like it's definitely like surreal expression, like German expressionism. But I mean, I think Cabinet of Dr. Caligari is probably set in the right period. Mm-hmm. To count as Gothic horror. I think it's even based on either like a short story or a novel. And I bet if you were to like read the actual story, that would probably come off as probably like a fairly like, basic Gothic horror kind of tale.
Yeah. That would be curious to read. I have very little memory of what the movie's actually about. I know there's kind of this damsel woman, as I recall.
There's a damsel woman, and there's this so the Dr. Caligari character himself is almost this kind of like little pudgy kind of guy, almost kind of almost reminds me a little bit of almost like the Penguin from Batman or something. And from what I remember is he's basically mind controlling this this slave of his to do his bidding, which is everything from, stalking, attacking, and, killing people. And, I mean, it's because it kind of is like, sort of like the first real horror movie. It's probably a little bit tamer than a lot of the other ones. 'Cause it's just, they didn't even really know what that genre was yet. So it's almost fully relying off of atmosphere, everything from like the sets and the lighting. But yeah, I think it's, I mean, if it's not Gothic horror, Well, do you agree? Would you feel that Cabinet of Dr. Caligari is even a horror movie?
Yeah. So again, I watched this when I was in film school. Don't remember it a whole lot. So of course all you listeners can make fun of me for not knowing what the fuck I'm talking about. But I remember the comments and the observations we made a lot was like, oh yeah, this is very like, Tim Burton was obviously inspired by this movie. Again, largely just for the aesthetics and the production design and all that type of stuff. It's like you can kind of see these things that are reminiscent there. So I'm trying to remember a lot about what was kind of horror movie-ish in the story and all that stuff. I mostly remember it just for its production design and kind of the vibe and tone of the experience.
Yeah, I think it's mainly just like the creepiness of it all. Like,
yeah,
both Dr. Caligari was kind of creepy, and so was the man who he was kind of who was like his servant, who was being brainwashed and doing his bidding. And
yeah, I should rewatch it so that I'm not such an idiot about it next time.
There's actually like a hilarious Portlandia sketch about the Cabinet of Dr. Caligari. Where it's about like this guy who's like he's like recommending the movie to this woman to check out. Mm-hmm. And then after she finally watches it, he's like, "I'm free," and he like breaks out of this like curse where it's like you pass on this thing where like you have to like make somebody else watch this movie, otherwise you're like kind of trapped. It's kind of making fun of, I think, just like kind of pretentious film people who are just recommending these sort of things.
Yeah,
but
that's funny.
But yeah, no, I mean, I think that's a perfect example of a movie that's long overdue actually to be remade.
Yeah, well, it's kind of interesting that considering how much of a classic it is. I mean, I hear it get referenced all the time. Maybe only amongst, film nerds, pretentious film buffs. I just feel like given how much of a classic film it is, you'd consider that maybe somebody would have wanted to do a more elaborate retelling of it, like take a lot of what it does and using modern production sensibilities, like make a non-silent version of it.
Yeah.
Where there's actual dialogue and...
Well, it's just been so long, right? Like that's the thing is like, I think like when enough time passes, you could remake almost anything.
It hasn't really been touched.
Yeah.
But nobody's really picked it up to...
I think I did hear something about how there has been a remake of the movie. I think maybe in like the late 80s or something. But I mean, I don't know. I don't even know why I haven't seen it at this point, unless maybe it's just really not like, I don't know. I've never really heard anybody talk about it.
Wait a minute. In 2005, there was The Cabinet of Dr. Caligari. What the hell is this? It's not rated. Apparently it's on Tubi.
Oh, okay.
Directed by David Lee Fisher. And then there was a 1962 version.
There's a lot of...
What the hell? There's the 1920 version. I think that's the original, right? Yeah.
Yeah.
I don't know. I'm going to have to look into these other versions.
Yeah.
The Cabinet of Dr. Caligari from 1948. This looks like some... It's either an... It's 5 minutes long, a TV short. The plot is unknown at this time. Okay, well, that just doesn't even qualify.
Have you ever seen the...
We've got this 2022, The Cabinet of Dr. Caligari adaptation.
I wonder if it's like one of those... It's probably like... the story's probably fallen into the public domain, so... just the name alone is...
like some random short that somebody was creating, so...
There's like an animated one called The Cabinet of Dr. Calamari. They're just... Yeah, they're all squids. And... But
not that funny.
Yeah. I don't know. Do we have much more to say about The Cabinet?
Yeah, I don't have too much more to say. Just the fact that I think that it's a worthwhile movie to check out and get some reference for.
Yeah.
And so on that note, I should probably get some reference for it because I don't know shit about it.
I do feel
I seen it back in the day.
I feel like it does fit enough into the Gothic horror category.
Yeah,
I think.
No, it probably does.
It's just a little bit more surreal than some of the other ones.
Yeah.
Just with those like really like, you know, like crooked angles and everything. But and again, just like, yeah, they weren't, it was kind of like one of the first of its kind. So they were really trying, probably like testing, like, you know, like what are even our limits here of what we can get away with maybe.
Yeah.
What would be too intense for viewers.
Well, that's just it. Yeah. Back in those early days of film.
A lot of people don't know, like back in the day, like horror movies were not called horror movies. That was something that kind of came along later. They were kind of considered like mystery shockers and that kind of thing.
Yeah. I would think that a lot of genres would not have been truly defined at that point, you know?
Yeah.
But anyway, yeah, let's move on here. The number 6. What is your number 6?
So, yeah, I'm going to go with some, I'm trying to throw in some obscure ones, for our listeners who are maybe like, you know, trying to see what else could be out there. And so this is a movie that I discovered, well, I guess I discovered it some time ago, but it was just a few years ago that I finally was able to find a copy and watch it. And, surprisingly enough, it is a variation of Beauty and the Beast.
Huh.
But it's not probably one that listeners would be familiar with because it's not the old French film from the 40s. It's not the Disney animation. It's this one that was made in like 1978. It's this Czechoslovakian director who I've actually seen a few other of his movies, and the ones that I've seen all seem to be kind of these like very particular kind of horror movies. And the reason I put this on the list is because it's like, yeah, if you ever want to see a Beauty and the Beast movie that is the closest to a horror movie, it's this one from 1978. And it's just the atmosphere of it all. Like, I mean, there's always something kind of been a bit spooky about the Beauty and the Beast story, especially when it's, you know, the Beast's mansion and everything. But when you watch this one, it's like you are in Transylvania and this is Dracula's castle. Like that is the vibes of this kind of Beauty and the Beast film. And it's just, yeah, visually, it's very beautiful.
What era is this from? Sorry.
It's from 1978.
Oh, okay.
And it's like a Czechoslovakian movie. And one thing that's kind of unique about it, I kind of like it, although part of me is kind of like, oh, it would have been neat if they went the traditional design where he's more of like a kind of beast, kind of like a wolf or a cat kind of design. But in this version of Beauty and the Beast, he's kind of like a bird man. Like he's got a big bird head. And that's the one thing that's kind of like very different about it. But it's still kind of like this, it's still kind of creepy. Like it's a kind of realistic.
Well, birds are pretty creepy.
Yeah. And I don't know. It's just one of those things where it's just, it's got everything that I love about Gothic movies, which is just the costumes, the set pieces, and just like the atmosphere. And like, I was very close to not putting this on the list because it's goddamn Beauty and the Beast. But I'm like, no, this is like everything about what is a Gothic horror movie. And you might not even find the title if you look up Beauty and the Beast, because it's kind of got more of a Czechoslovakian translation to it. But if you're curious about the director's name, I'm going to butcher this, but it's something like Juraj Harris. I don't know.
I see on here, I think it's
he made
Pana Netvor.
Yeah,
what they call it.
He made another movie that was also kind of Gothic horror that I really liked called Morgiana, and it's just, I don't know. Yeah, he's just really good at making these combination of just beautiful and creepy scenarios. And I'm not going to get into Morgiana, but it kind of like led me to his Beauty and the Beast movie. And yeah, I don't know. It's if you look online, if you're able to find any like stills of this movie, like that might be enough to just sell you on this thing. And yeah, I don't know. It's just one of those really kind of like random ones that I never hear anybody talking about.
Well,
ever.
Yeah, I mean, a lot of that foreign stuff kind of gets overlooked, hey?
Yeah. And I kind of knew, I was like, oh, I should try to throw at least a few foreign Gothic movies in here, because that's probably like really like where the best like I don't know, yeah, like it's I kind of think like like really it's got to probably be in Europe to really do it right.
I'm sure there's a lot of stuff that kind of has slipped under the radar over the decades. Well, my number 6 was The Woman in Black, which we talked about a little bit. Yeah, already kind of talked about it. Love the aesthetic. I think that.
Well, you got to just check out.
That was Daniel Radcliffe really kind of showing his chops right after Harry Potter and. Doing. I think that was probably the first role that he did, or one of them, right after finishing Harry Potter. I think so.
I've been really impressed with the movie choices that Daniel Radcliffe has taken. Like, I guess that's maybe one of the nice things about being Harry Potter is that
some real characters too.
Yeah.
Like,
well, I think he could have just retired after Harry Potter. So I think like really whatever movies he's doing now are movies that he's just doing for the sake of him being interested and just wanting to do them. And,
that's the cool thing, right? Is he can take whatever sort of risk he wants, and he doesn't have to worry about, whether it's does good things for his career or not.
Yeah.
It's a pretty great position to be in.
Well, maybe one thing I could, I don't know. I there's not too much I could really say without ruining the original Woman in Black, but if you like Gothic horror, man, you might want to check out the '80s one. It's quite different, but it's cool. The thing that's like kind of interesting about the '80s one is it's very like just slow and quiet, and very little happens until a particular thing happens, and it's not even like that the thing is done that effectively or well, but it just catches you off guard because the movie is just so quiet. And then all of a sudden just like this like screaming kind of jump scare happens. And that's kind of like anybody who knows the movie, like, the scene I'm talking about, it's basically what the movie's famous for, is just like the whole movie is just kind of like this one jump scare. And it's not like the jump scare.
Every time you give any kind of commentary about any of these, I'm just like, ooh, that sounds really intriguing. I want to watch this now.
Well, hopefully our listeners are getting that same reaction. But I remember I saw that movie when I was like still pretty young, and I remember it I just had a lot of creepy stuff in it. And the jump out thing, it's like it's not even like near the end of the movie. It's like almost like in the middle of the movie. And it just kind of catches you off guard, and then it kind of goes back to this like slow dread feeling. And I don't know. Yeah, you're almost just sort of like, you're kind of like, if it's a movie where I can't even know if I can choose which one of the two movies I like more as far as Woman in the Black goes.
Yeah. Like
the Daniel Radcliffe one is definitely the much more polished movie. But
and that's where it's like you get kind of the Hollywood polish and stuff. It's not. I wouldn't describe that as being raw like Robert Eggers' movies. It's got the production design, it's got the style and stuff, and I like that. Mm-hmm. But there's also the other way of doing it, which is to not be so polished and Okay. Well, number 5.
Like my number 5 would be I'm just gonna throw in Frankenstein.
Yeah, like sure. The classic original,
the classic Boris Karloff Frankenstein. I was like, I wanted to throw in at least one of the classic Universal movies in the list, and
I'm looking forward to diving into a bunch of that.
Have you seen any of the Universal monster movies?
I've seen Young Frankenstein.
Okay.
Which is great. I love that movie.
It is great.
I actually watched that. Speaking of all the classic movies my dad used to get me to watch, that was one of them, and we watched it on Halloween.
Nice.
It was just him and I. We were at home together that Halloween, and again, since our family always flicks the lights off and lights the candles and stuff, we would often have like a movie night or something in lieu of not going trick or treating.
Yeah.
And my dad was like, "Well, Kevin, I brought home a horror film for us to watch." and I was like, "What is this gonna be like?"
How old do you think you were?
I was in my early to mid teens, maybe 14 or something. And I don't know. I've always appreciated the stuff that my dad wants to share with me.
I know what you mean.
Because
anytime my dad was like, "Oh, that's one of my favorite movies," I was always like, mental note, like,
yeah. I don't know. It's like it wasn't even that his that his taste was always in line with mine, but it's just a part of it is just getting to know your dad.
Yeah,
and the other part of it is getting someone from an older generation to share something that was important to them with you.
Yeah,
and I'm really actually quite grateful that I got to be brought up with a bunch of this stuff.
Yeah.
So yeah, he brought Young Frankenstein.
The great thing about Young
it was
Frankenstein
hilarious.
is it's done so like a lot of people just kind of, credit it for its comedy. And I don't feel it gets enough credit for how detailed it was at replicating those old movies. Because other than the humor, you could actually watch the old Frankenstein movies and then just follow it up immediately with Young Frankenstein, and it would actually fit perfectly.
The funny thing is like watching that movie, I was like, this movie, I presumed it was from like the 40s or whatever, not really having much of a context for when it was made. Of course, I did know Gene Wilder. That was probably like the second Gene Wilder movie I'd seen, and I was like, oh, hey, Dad, it's Willy Wonka.
It's Wonka.
But I think it actually came out in
74.
Oh, okay. Yeah, 1974. Yeah, that's right. So it was definitely not like, so it's a black and white movie, but it was definitely long after the days of color.
And you had to fight them hard on that. The studios did everything they could to be like, no.
It feels like a 1940s
it's got to be in color
movie, you know, and it's very authentic to that.
Yeah, and it would have been interesting to have seen a version of it in color, but it would have destroyed everything about what worked with that movie if it was in color. It's great. Like, again, like I saw that movie. I can't even remember how young I was, because that was, again, like the easiest way to get me. I wanted to see real horror movies as a kid. Yeah. But my parents wouldn't really let me. So it was like, okay, we'll just throw all the horror comedies at them. So Young Frankenstein, I got fairly early on. Like I saw that before any of the other Frankenstein ones. But like having Frankenstein on my list, I should just say, like, I kind of got to lump Bride of Frankenstein with it. Like, I almost kind of think of them as one big movie. You could almost maybe even throw in Son of Frankenstein, because those are like the three that have Boris Karloff in them. And then they go a little bit off the rails after that. But those three, if you look at those first three like a trilogy, it's a really solid trilogy. Arguably, Bride of Frankenstein might actually even be the best of the three. But there's a lot of damn classic stuff in the first Frankenstein. Yeah. And I don't know, I just the Frankenstein one's really I've got some gripes about the Dracula movie. But Frankenstein is great. Like, I love The Invisible Man. And the Wolfman. But yeah, Frankenstein is almost like, if I had to almost kind of pick one from that era, I'd probably go with those Boris Karloff Frankenstein movies. I think you'd enjoy them. Yeah. No, I'll definitely check some of them out. My number 5 was Bram Stoker's Dracula. We already talked about it, but is there anything else? Well worth being on the. No, I think we've talked about it quite a bit. Yeah. But well worth being on the list, I think. Yeah, it was. It was Bram Stoker's Dracula and Interview with the Vampire are technically on my top 10 if it was just to be like, the ultimate Gothic movies, because I think they're both just really great when it comes to being that. But again, a lot of you viewers probably have seen them, so I'm giving you weird stuff. Did you? I don't know. Yeah, were you done? Was there anything else you wanted to say about Bram Stoker? No, I think we should probably try and roll right along here over the ones we've talked about already. So my next one is a Russian movie from 1967, and it is called V. V. Not the letter V. It's not an alien invasion film. It's VIY. I'm hoping it's pronounced V. It might be pronounced Vi. Vi. You know what? You're probably right. This is the problem when I look at a lot of these movies and don't ever talk to people about them, and then I can never know how they're actually pronounced. But I think you're right. It's probably Vi. Do you know what Vi might I haven't translate to? I bet you that's not even well, because you know how like the whole Russian alphabet is just totally different. Hey, like it's probably not even Vi. Like in Russian, it's probably something. If I saw the movie more recently, I'm sure they explain the meaning of Vi and what it means. Yeah. Maybe it's the name of the character, but I actually think you would really like this movie. I mean, as long as you're cool with subtitles, it's a really fun. It's not very scary. It almost kind of feels like it could have been made by Disney Studios in the 60s because it's just so whimsical and kind of almost wholesome.
It's live action though, right?
It is live action, but that's what I mean is it feels like one of those live action Disney movies of the 60s.
A Russian Gothic horror film. That sounds like something that would be interesting.
Yeah,
to check
well,
out.
basically, I'm pretty sure that this is based
see what
on.
the hell that even
I'm
is.
pretty sure this is based on like a very old classic Russian folktale. It just has that sort of vibe, like that. This was not like just like a new story told. This was like some old thing that people would tell their kids back in the day, and it's basically about a young priest who I guess has like been given like leave for a period of time. And eventually he's kind of basically ordered, he kind of runs into a witch that kind of messes with him. And I think like long story short, like the witch ends up kind of dying, and he's ordered to basically spend 3 nights inside of an old church with like the corpse of this like witch who actually is ended up like she's actually kind of like this like young kind of like beautiful like witch like in this coffin, but it's kind of like each night he has to spend in this thing, like she kind of comes to life and kind of like screws with him. And by the time it's like the 3rd night, it's like not only does she show up, but there's like literally just like these like demonic entities that just kind of like crawl out of like the depths of this place. And that's kind of when it starts to really get neat, and you're like, oh yeah, this is like going full-blown Gothic horror now. Again, it never really got scary. Maybe if you were a little kid back in that day watching it, it could be a bit creepy, but this almost seemed like a horror movie that you can kind of bring the whole family to. I keep kind of referencing kind of like the Disney thing, but the reason why I'm putting it on the list is because it's like, as far as Gothic horror, like it's got that look. It's just got that style. The movie was also remade not that long ago. Like, so there's actually a big...
Also in Russian? Or
it's in Russian, but it has like that... It kind of has almost like that high budget Hollywood kind of feel to it. Like there's lots of CGI and...
Well, how do you like the remake by comparison?
I actually haven't seen the remake. I'm interested to checking it out.
Fuck, we should maybe like make a night of...
Yeah,
watching them.
It's got a little bit of a, maybe not as dark looking as Sleepy Hollow, but it almost looks a little bit like the Van Helsing movie a bit. Like you can definitely tell there's a lot of green screen in it and stuff, but it looks like for a Russian budgeted movie, it looked like it was a pretty big budget Russian movie with like tons of effects. So, yeah, I don't know, man. Yeah, you might want to check out either one of those. I'm definitely up for checking out the remake if you want to see that sometime.
Cool.
But I definitely recommend the original 60s one, because that was just like, it's just like a lot of fun if you're looking for something that's kind of not really very scary, but has like really great just visuals and nice practical effects to it.
Yeah, that sounds like a cool idea. Okay. Well, was that your number 4?
I think that was my 5. That was my number 5, or maybe that was my, I think that was my 5.
Okay. Well, my number 4 is Sleepy Hollow.
Nice. That's my number 3. So,
well, see, look, my 3 and 4 are Sweeney Todd and Sleepy Hollow.
Yeah.
And it's really hard for me to actually decide between these two, which I like more. Because I really love them both. I don't know. I ended up just being like, fuck it. One's 3, one's 4. Just decide. Like, They could easily swap places, But yeah, maybe Sleepy Hollow, because it was so important to me as a child, should be higher. Yeah.
Well, for me, I mean, definitely in my case, I'm definitely.
Oh yeah.
Team
Sweeney
Sleepy
Todd's probably
Hollow.
not even on your list.
No, but it's like it's in like the linear notes. I definitely made note of it with some of the other ones that didn't quite make it. But no, it's just the fact that it's actually kind of for the same reason that In Hell didn't make my list, where I was just sort of like, oh, even In Hell's like it's a little too close to Sleepy Hollow, just because it's Johnny Depp and stuff like that.
From Hell, you mean?
Or From Hell, sorry. So I was just kind of like, oh, like I'm gonna like Sleepy Hollow will kind of be like my pick for that sort of a thing, just because it's I just find it so gothic. It's so gothic in all the right ways. Like it's kind of like, it's definitely not my favorite Tim Burton movie, but it's
little village town.
But yeah, it's just, and that's another movie that I had the soundtrack to, and I was using the music in a lot of my little short movies when I was a kid.
Oh man, the music is so freaking great in that.
It's one
Yeah.
of it's one of those like movies where I'm assuming it's almost all in studio, but some of those outdoor scenes.
Oh well, they built like a whole.
It really
town,
looks
hey?
like yeah,
No,
it really.
They did.
So that was outdoor.
They built
Some
like
of
a
it.
They built like a big town set.
Yeah, because I was
going to
say like it just looked too good. That looked too good to be some interior studio.
Yeah, no, it was awesome.
But,
it was like quite the production.
Yeah.
And again, you want to talk about like fog and mist and stuff, and just having that. But although there was a lot of like stuff in the woods that was in studio too.
Yeah. But yeah, I don't know. I almost feel like I almost would have been okay if Tim Burton even made like a sequel or two to it. Like that's how much I love that world.
Yeah.
Where I've been like, oh, let me see like the further adventures of Christopher Walken and his headless horseman-ness, right? But or even just if just Tim Burton just kind of did other stuff at that level of gothicness. I guess he kind of did, but I don't know. For me, that was like just the one that he really got right as far as just going like full blown gothic.
It was such a perfect pairing of source material with the director,
Yeah.
But yeah, so that's my number 4. Could easily be number 3.
And I don't know what it is with these gothic movies that I almost seem to enjoy the nice, pretty moments in these gothic movies just as much as the dark stuff.
Oh,
like
yeah.
I love the flashbacks when he's young Ichabod and he's with his mom and she's doing little witchy stuff.
Yeah, and that contrast of things going on actually makes like one stand out and be effective in contrast to what everything else is like. You know? So, and I mean, Sweeney Todd has a bunch of that too, where again they have kind of this fantasy of Sweeney and Mrs. Lovitz going and living on the beach and stuff.
Yeah.
Or some flashbacks to when he was like living his life with his child and wife.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, I mean, it makes it more effective when you create that contrast.
Yeah.
So anyway, we could move on to your number 4.
So my number 4 is a movie. I'm wondering if you know this movie or not. I mean, I don't think you've seen it, but I'm just wondering if you've heard of it. But I had to include it on the list. It is the movie Gothic.
Oh.
Not Gothica, not the Halle Berry movie, which I actually have not seen. But Gothic is a movie that it's kind of personal to me because this was a movie that it's not really like on most people's top anything horror lists, but this was a movie that I remember seeing in the horror section of my video store growing up, and literally just the cover itself freaked me out. And the cover was essentially a recreation of the old famous painting, The Nightmare. If for those who don't know, it's basically like a painting of sleep paralysis, where there's like a woman asleep on her bed with this little kind of demonic creature just crouched sitting on her chest. Now. Yeah. And so they recreate that in the movie.
This is apparently streaming on Tubi as well.
Oh,
I hope this is accurate because I want to go and look up all these friggin' movies.
Well, that's the thing is I think Tubi, if the movie's kind of a bit obscure, like if it's not like a huge fan favorite, it's almost like there's a better chance that Tubi might screen it, right?
Yeah.
And I think this movie's a lot of fun. Like, I mean, I honestly, man, I don't know what you think. You might not love it in the same way that maybe some of the other movies are on our lists, but in that way that you were kind of saying, like with Interview with the Vampire, where you kind of just go on this ride. Yeah, this movie is that. And so, yeah, I mean, just for a long time, I would see it in the video store and I was just like, I don't know if I can handle what's in this movie just based on that cover. I don't know. It's just, as a kid, it was very creepy. And then I remember when I looked on the back of the cover, there was like a review in quotations that said, "The Thinking Man's Nightmare on Elm Street," whatever the hell that means. But it was enough that I was just sort of like, I'm intrigued. It sounded like this like sophisticated horror movie.
Right. Yeah.
And so, so I rented it, and basically what the movie is about is it is the retelling of the night where Mary Shelley and her boyfriend Percy Shelley and her sister go and visit Lord Byron, and they all kind of spent a weekend together in his mansion trying to scare each other with homemade like horror stories. And this is what led to the creation of the story Frankenstein. That's what came out from this weekend. And
Sounds neat.
yeah, I mean, like really the majority of the movie doesn't even really have that much of a plot. It's like it kind of starts off that way and then it kind of just breaks off into them all having these weird, almost like psychedelic, just like horror scenario kind of things happening where they're all kind of just in their own little like nightmare scenarios. But the visuals are great. It's like, it's very hard for me to think of like Gothic horror movies without thinking of this movie Gothic.
Yeah, okay.
It was also my introduction to the director Ken Russell, who is this British madman of a filmmaker who just most of the things he made are just very offbeat. I'm not sure if you've seen any Ken Russell movies. If there's one I would guess maybe you might have seen is he directed The Who's Tommy.
Oh, okay.
But he didn't really do that many like actual horror movies. Like Gothic might actually be his only like true bona fide horror movie. That in a movie called Lair of the White Worm. But yeah, it's just it's if you like Gothic horror and if you're familiar a bit with the romantic period of Mary Shelley and Percy Shelley, it's just like a neat little movie. It's not there's not much of a plot, but if you kind of just want to see like a lot of like weird nightmarish visual scenarios and stuff, I think you'll enjoy it.
Oh, never mind. One of these movies I thought I'd seen, but no.
But anyways, yeah, that's all I guess I really need to say about Gothic, but I just felt like, yeah, I couldn't have a Gothic horror list without me throwing Gothic on there.
Yeah, it would be incomplete without, I see it has Natasha Richardson and Timothy Spall.
Yeah, it's also got.
I love Timothy Spall, man. He's such a character.
Is he like he's kind of like a he's a bit like a heavyset guy who's in a lot of British stuff. Okay, yeah, he's Dr. Polidori, who was also known for writing a famous vampire novel a good deal before Bram Stoker's Dracula came out. So that's the cool thing is like a lot of kind of horror literature came out of this weekend of just these young sort of, I mean, they were almost kind of like the original hippies in many ways. They were all about free love, and there's also a lot of kind of like weird like orgy stuff going on in the movie. The movie also, Percy Shelley is played by oh my God, why am I blanking out? I'm a big fan of his, and he turned out he just died this year from kind of like a freak accident. Oh no.
Who would it be?
He was Warlock. He was in a bunch of interesting
Warlock.
Warlock was like this kind of campy horror movie from like the late 80s.
Okay, so
actually, he's the one guy who I think
this
actually
is an actor who was in this movie.
Yeah, and
Julian Sands.
Julian Sands is who I wanted to say. He's the one guy who I actually think was born to play Lestat. If anyone could have done Lestat better than Tom Cruise, it was Julian Sands, and he went missing like in like early January of this year, and nobody could find him for months. And he did like to go hiking, and people thought, he might have died on a hiking trail, and it was like maybe 5 months later that they kind of found his body. But
so what happened to him?
No one knows for sure, but I think the idea is that he slipped like off a cliff.
Oh shit.
Yeah. But yeah, he's great. He's in a lot of neat. If you guys are horror fans, he's in a lot of greats. He's in Arachnophobia. He's in a messed up movie called Boxing Helena. But yeah, no, he makes a really good Percy Shelley, and Gabriel Byrne plays Lord Byron. But yeah,
nice. Well, that'll be one to check out. Let's see, where are we at here now?
We're at 3.
Yeah, so my 3 is Sweeney Todd. Can't remember if I was going to say anything about that. I think I already pretty much exhausted that. I think the one thing that I will say was that I actually got to see this in theaters when it came out, and so for that reason, it's kind of important to me because, getting to have the original theatrical experience is definitely counts for something. Whereas when I saw Sleepy Hollow, it was like probably in the early 2000s, sometime mid 2000s, on like a regular TV at home, a regular square TV, we might add, like a CRT, I don't know, tube TV or whatever.
And I was the other way around. I saw Sleepy Hollow in theaters and saw Sweeney Todd probably on my computer, but I think I would have enjoyed Sweeney Todd a lot more if I did see it in theaters.
Yeah, well, and likewise, it would have been great to I would have loved to go see Sleepy Hollow in theaters, but
yeah. Well, we gotta just wait. I'm sure there'll be maybe the Rio theater will do a screening sometime.
I'm sure that'll happen at some point.
Yeah.
What's your number? What's your number 3?
Well, we'll skip that, which is because my number 3 was Sleepy Hollow, so we've covered that already.
Yep.
I'll go to my number 2. This was a movie I really was debating whether this fit on the list, because it's not your typical kind of horror movie. But again, I feel like it fits with the Gothic aesthetic. But this was, again, another movie that I kind of only saw for the first time maybe like 3 or 4 years ago. And this movie kind of blew me away. I don't know. It was one of those movies where I saw kind of like late at night, where you're almost like too tired to start a movie and you just had to watch it anyways. And you're just kind of spaced out while watching it. And but that was like for some reason, that was like the perfect state of mind for me to be with this movie, because it's kind of like a fever dream. This is another foreign European movie. I guess it's...
Well, I'm glad you're bringing some of these up. This should be new and fresh for people.
Yeah, it's a director who he's made a number of movies I really like. If you're a horror fan and you like foreign movies, his most famous movie is probably the movie Possession, which I love so much. I was like, I got to see this guy's other movies. And he's the director's name. He's a Polish director named, again, this is going to be another one I'm going to butcher. I want to say it's Andrzej Zalewski. All you film fans out there are going to probably make fun of me for how I said it.
It's probably just Andre.
Yeah. Oh, sorry. What did I say?
Andrzej.
Oh, yeah. I'm sure it's Andre. And yeah, so he made this movie. It's called, I guess in Polish it would be called Diabol, which is the devil. And so I don't know. I kind of saw like the cover, and it was kind of in my like movie list for a long time, and I just never got around to watching it until one day I decided to. And I love the look of this movie, just like the set. Like, they're not even sets. I mean, it looks like it's all shot in real locations. And to try to like briefly sum up this movie, because it's not an easy movie to explain. The movie's very metaphorical.
Yeah, well, you don't have to get too into it.
Yeah,
but just kind of.
It's not like your traditional, like, I wouldn't even really say it's much of a scary movie. It's more just like a psychological, like almost like this character is almost just like trapped in hell. And it's during the Prussian war, and it's this character who I guess was like kind of captured and imprisoned, and this dark cloaked character shows up and just frees this character from this prison cell. And then he's kind of letting him go free, and he's in this weird limbo where these two characters kind of represent like good and evil. And he's just kind of like wandering through the land, and he's just all these kind of like nightmare scenarios are kind of playing out, not really with monsters, but it's just sort of like everything about his like world is kind of destroyed. Like his fiance has left him, and she's now going to marry his like best friend. He like discovers his like dad has like committed suicide, and his like sister has gone insane, and just like everything's just gone to shit. And the whole movie is just this character who's just kind of like freaking out the whole time. And I won't really get into too many details about it. Obviously the movie's called The Devil, so you can kind of decide for yourself who's the devil in the movie. It's kind of obvious. But it's just I don't know, it just kind of feels like a fever dream, this movie. And I remember like it didn't scare me, but it did like creep me out. There was just things in it that I just felt like I was watching like an actual like nightmare, where just everything just kind of feels like everything's wrong.
So is this this is like set in an earlier time period? Yeah,
it's definitely set. I guess it's set during the Prussian War, which might have been in like the late 1700s or early 1800s. So yeah, I definitely feel it has that Gothic sort of feel to it. But it's not overly stylized. Like it's kind of like, it's like, you know, they get the costumes right and the sets right, but you know, I don't think they're not overly playing around too much with lighting, or even fog. But it's just a movie that, I don't know, it really connected with me. I really liked it. And, you know, again, it's like in the 70s, there was just one thing that was terrible about a lot of 70s horror movies was the way they made blood look. It just looks like thick paint in a lot of movies. Right. But this movie, I don't know what it is. Like they got it right. Like there's a lot of blood in this film and it looks like real blood. And just little like things like that where you're just sort of like, yeah, it feels very real in a lot of ways. And I don't know, the director, if you watch, and if you're familiar with this director and if you've seen any of his movies, he seems to be obsessed about casting like young women and just making their performances just, you know, I don't know, bring them to just like a level of hysteria, basically. And that's the thing I've noticed in a lot of his movies is just these like kind of like hysterical performances by these women in the movies. And yeah, I don't know. It's just this very kind of like surreal, nightmarish film. And I don't know if that sounds like something up your alley. If you're kind of more for like the psychological horror thing, yeah, I couldn't help but put this on my Gothic horror list because I'm probably not going to be putting it on any of the other lists. But
yeah, so this is not an English movie then. I take
no, I'm pretty sure it would be the language. I'm pretty sure is Polish. Yeah.
Okay. Gotcha.
I don't know. The few Polish movies I've just seen, they're just always really bleak. Even if they're not horror movies, they just have this bleak feeling. And then when it's a horror movie, it's just that much extra bleak. So, yeah, check it out and enjoy.
Well, I mean, you know, we are talking about horror films. So,
yeah.
I mean,
if you like horror,
you'll
enjoy it. Yeah.
Okay. So my second last one here, number 2, is From Hell, which I don't think that we've talked too much about today, but we did talk about it quite a bit in the slasher episode. And so, you know, the observation being that this is a movie that kind of crosses over between genres in terms of being a bit of a slasher film and a mystery, and also the Gothic horror thing you have going on. Again, one of the reasons I love this film is like I love period films. I love that old London setting. You know, you got all these kind of the dark, seedy underbelly of old London with the world of these prostitutes and stuff. I mean, it's just a great vibe all around. It's always funny to say that about some of these things that are, you know, films that are designed not to be feel-good movies, but they sure make me feel good. And I think it's just it's got a lot of intrigue, and man, what a great one.
Yeah, no, when you're talking about it, it makes me, I actually would really like to rewatch From Hell.
When's the last time you watched it, do you think?
You know, I honestly think I probably only watched it once.
Really?
And it wasn't when it first came out, but it also wasn't super recently either.
Yeah, I'd be down to do a rewatch because I like to. I mean, I've watched it probably about 3, maybe 4 times now. But I mean, yeah, I'll totally rewatch it with you.
And weirdly, like I don't think I was expecting very much from it. I think maybe because again I was coming off of Sleepy Hollow, I was just sort of like, oh well. Like it's probably going to be kind of like Sleepy Hollow, but it's not going to be Tim Burton, so it's just not going to probably be like nearly as good. But
well, I feel like it's one of those movies that was a little bit under the radar, so to speak, or people don't talk about it too much nowadays. I feel like it gets kind of forgotten. Yeah. But man, yeah, no, it's yeah. I mean, I remember it's funny enough. It's directed by the Hughes brothers, which seems like just such a random choice. Maybe that was really maybe why I was partly skeptical, because the Hughes brothers were these it was these young black brothers who were mostly famous for making these like coming of age kind of like, you know, kind of like gangster kind of movies.
but they were really good. Like that was the thing was
So they directed From Hell.
yeah, and
Wow.
like they're known for making the two movies I mostly think of the Hughes brothers is Menace to Society and Dead Presidents, which are two like I don't know. I'm just big fans of both of them, especially Menace to Society, and but they're just these like kind of boys in the hood kind of movies.
Oh, okay, gotcha.
And then I think they made like a documentary about pimps, and then they made From Hell. And I was just sort of like, wow. Like,
Well, you know, from pimps to prostitutes.
there you go. There's the
old
connection.
London.
Yeah. My thought is
In
just
some ways, it actually fits quite in there in the sense that it's like kind of dealing with people in this seedy underbelly, their dealings on the streets and that sort of thing.
yeah. I just don't know whether like maybe that was a movie that maybe if they were either just directors for hire or they might have truly just been fans. Like maybe they read the graphic novel and they were such big fans of it that they were like, you know what, we want to do this next, you know?
Yeah, it would be interesting
And,
to know what their motivation was for doing it.
yeah. Because I don't really think they did anything like From Hell after From Hell. I could be wrong. I'm not quite that sure like where their careers went after that, but that was like the main thing I just always remember. I'm like, oh, it's like those it's like the guy who makes those kind of like coming of age black movies. But yeah, on an unrelated note, Dead Presidents and Menace to Society are definitely worth watching. But I would like to rewatch From Hell. I wonder, is it possible that there's maybe like a director's cut or special edition of From Hell? Like I could almost see something like that happening, but like because for DVDs, right? They sometimes like kind of like release these like slightly more extreme versions. And
Try to remember what the version is that I have. If it's the fuck, hold on a minute. I'm just trying to look at their filmography. Okay, this is weird. They only have 4 director credits. I don't know that they directed From Hell. They might have just produced it.
oh, my bad.
But what the hell is going on
Whoops.
here? Producer.
Maybe it's another pair of brothers that I'm confusing them with. For some reason, I don't know why I thought
Let me just go look up the movie From Hell. That was directed by Albert Hughes and Alan Hughes. Well, what the fuck is going on here? Oh, you know what it was?
So
it was because I looked them up as the Hughes brothers.
Oh,
and
yeah.
It just wasn't the right way of labeling them or whatever. Okay, never mind.
They're the Hughes sisters now.
Yeah. Much like the Wachowskis are now the Wachowski sisters.
Yeah. But I would I would definitely love to rewatch From Hell. Also, I can't remember all the people that are in it, but I love me some Ian Holm.
Oh, yeah, Ian Holm is great. And he's great in that movie.
Yeah.
Like, wow, what a performance.
Yeah. No, just
but like between being like this very like trusting guy and then, turning out to be Jack the Ripper. Just to spoil it all for you.
Whoops.
Well, look, like if people are I don't know, fuck.
Yeah. No, guys,
I said, like we're not going to hold back on spoilers for
maybe
this
we should like put
show.
in like in our descriptions, just like every episode, it's like spoilers for every just we'll let them know. I mean, it's guys, like the movie's like 20 years old. It's from a graphic novel that's even older. We have to just sort of assume that you guys have seen at least most of these movies that we're talking about. If it's something really obscure that we think maybe you haven't seen, well, those ones we won't spoil, but come on, you're supposed to be we want horror fans listening in on this.
Yeah. Although, there are a lot of these obscure older ones that you've been talking about. I imagine a lot of those have not been seen by most people.
Yeah.
But anyway,
that's what I'm here for.
Well, let's talk about number 1 then. What is number 1 on your list? Or did you give your number 2?
I think I did. I think like my number 2 was Diablo, that Polish movie.
Okay, cool.
And
so that one's that. And then what is your number 1? I'm really curious.
Well,
probably know
it
what
should
mine
have
is.
been it should have been obvious that I would be ending my number one with another Mario Bava movie.
Of course.
Did anyone see that coming? Yeah, I was very close from going with Nosferatu. Oh man, maybe I should go with Nosferatu. Well, they're both
which
so
one?
good.
Which Nosferatu?
I mean, personally, I actually like the as far as rewatching, as much as I love the original, I kind of enjoy rewatching the 1978 or 79 Werner Herzog
I'm gonna
one.
put that on our list as one to watch because I think I would really enjoy that. And
it's good, and it's definitely got some creepy moments for sure. And there's just a lot of a lot of impressive stuff in that movie. Like there's a part where like a lot of the stuff in that movie, Dracula kind of almost like represents like the plague itself. And there's just parts where they have like the streets just like littered with like these gray rats.
Yeah.
And just the fact that they shot it all like and it's all real, like and in camera. And there's a scene I never forget because it's just so. It's not from Dracula at all, but they put it in this movie where it's just like this aristocratic, like kind of like family dining outside at this elegant table, having a kind of like their last dinner, while there's just a pile of just rats scurrying or like around their legs, and they're just sort of like, "Oh, do you want to join us? We have the plague," and like they just kind of all know that they're fucked, but just kind of trying to like live life to the fullest while they like still can before like they kind of die of the plague.
Yeah,
and there's just like little things like that where you're just sort of like, oh yeah, this is different. But I don't know. It just seems very like they shot it, I guess, in parts of Germany that was just still like just very old and untouched, where you're like, this really feels like I'm maybe watching something that was photographed in like the 1800s. Like there's just something that feels really authentic about the movie.
To it, hey?
Yeah. But the movie that I was really going to try to put, I guess, as my number one, just because I felt like it had to be on here, is Mario Bava's Black Sunday.
Oh, so he did Black Sabbath.
We did Black Sabbath, and then there's Black Sunday, which is technically, I think this is officially Mario Bava's first film, and it's just really important to the Gothic horror genre. It's kind of like it's a black and white movie. And it's like he took the style of the old classic 1930s Universal horror movies and just kind of like cranked that style to 11. It's just like the ultimate kind of classic Universal horror movie that just happens to be like an Italian movie. And the movie, I'm pretty sure it's in English, so you don't have to worry about that. This movie was a huge inspiration on Tim Burton. Like just in general, like on his career, like he was a big fan of this movie growing up, and it was almost Sleepy Hollow in particular takes a lot from the look and style of like Black Sabbath.
Of Black Sunday.
Oh, sorry, Black Sunday. Yeah, which is so it's about a witch. Some movies title it The Mask of Death, because the gimmick with this movie is they right at the beginning of the movie they discover she's a witch, and they kill her by putting this metal mask over her face, and the mask is almost like an Iron Maiden. There's just all these like spikes inside of the mask.
Okay. I think that's actually like a medieval torture device that they used to use, because I remember going to this. It was a museum of like medieval stuff, medieval things, medieval artifacts, and they had a whole section of it developed dedicated to like torture devices and things like that. And I seem to recall seeing there was a number of different things that they would put on people's heads. Like the one was like this sort of cage thing that I think they would put some, I don't know, like mice in there or something.
Oh, yeah, I could see that. And
I don't know.
It eats away at their eyes or something.
Yeah,
but
some
well,
like
in Black Sunday, they kind of just like placed the mask over her face, and then this big muscular like executioner just has this like giant mallet, and he just like bashes with the mallet the mask like right into her face, and then she kind of like later is like resurrected, but for the rest of like the movie, like she's got these just puncture marks all over her face from the mask and stuff. And she's played by this classic British actress named Barbara Steele, who's kind of known as an old kind of scream queen. But that's probably her most iconic role and movie is Black Sunday. So yeah, if you guys really like the old the old classic Universal movies or even just the really kind of like Tim Burton kind of stuff. Black Sunday is like, yeah, just like one of the most kind of stylistic of those kind of movies. So I thought, why not put it at number one?
Yeah, 1960. Hey.
Yeah. Yeah. In some ways, it was almost.
Well, I'm checking to see if it's on Tubi, but it's not.
It's
on
almost kind of
Tubi.
considered like there was a few, I think, Italian horror movies before that, but that was kind of like what started the beginning of like the Italian horror genre. Kind of starts with Black Sunday, at least as far as like the first like important Italian horror movie.
Yeah. Yeah, that's really interesting to know.
But that's why I guess Mario Bava is considered the godfather of Italian horror because he was kind of the first.
Yeah, the pioneer, hey?
Yeah.
Well, it's good to have all that stuff in your reference and, you know, the fact that you've actually gotten to see it all. And
Yeah. It's been a long time since I've seen like that movie too, so might have to do a rewatch.
I wrote it down along with Black Sabbath there, so maybe we'll get to check them out.
I don't know if it has like maybe the greatest you know, if you're rewatching, the writing maybe might be a bit wonky. Like it's not like it's a mind-blowing story, but it's just that kind of thing where like, you know, even if you just have it in the background,
Yep.
like anytime you just glance at the screen, you're like, oh, that looks amazing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, my number one is, and we've talked about it before. We talked about it quite at length. I raved about it.
Oh yes, I know where it is. Yeah.
It is Interview with the Vampire.
Yeah.
And
It's a good choice.
yeah, I mean, I've already said it all. I love the fact that this movie draws me in, takes me on a journey. It's a journey I really love. I love the casting. Yeah, it's one of those ones that I can keep on rewatching over and over again. I've seen it at least half a dozen times, probably closer to a dozen. But yeah,
You know what I think is one of the oh, sorry. Go on.
yeah, no, it's not important. What were you going to say?
Well, I think it's something that you would agree on, which is just I think part of what makes that movie so rewatchable and just what kind of just makes it just kind of flow so much from scene to scene. There's a lot of things. Like I mean, really everything kind of went right with that movie, but the music is so good. It's,
I know.
It just kind of just really kind of just carries you along from like scene to scene. It's I don't you know there's those certain movies.
It's very sweeping orchestra, but then it also has these like real horrific strings that he uses. But then there's also these moments of like just calm beauty. Like man, there's this one. It's like a segment of a piece of music that I used to just put on repeat and put it into my ears, and I'd walk around at night and just listen to it over and over again.
We've spent some times
So
in some dark
beautiful.
cemeteries listening to Interview with the Vampire soundtracks.
Yeah, I guess that's true.
And what was I going to say? There was something else I was going to.
Well, you were talking about how the music is sweeps you along, takes you for the ride.
Well, I guess it's just, and this is something that could be said about kind of any movie that's just almost so it's just you know when you have a movie where almost like all the scenes work and it becomes a rewatchable movie. Those tend to be movies where it's like almost like it doesn't matter what scene you're at. It's like just while you're watching the movie, you're watching exactly the scene you want to be watching until it goes into the next scene, and then that's the scene that you most want to be watching. Like you're not like fast forwarding or waiting to like get to a certain scene. You're just enjoying it wherever you're at while watching it. I don't know. That's how I feel like with that one.
Yeah, totally. And it's so dynamic, you know, it's such a dynamic film in terms of it taking you on these, on a ride of kind of crazy dramatic moments to moments of like peace and beauty and moments of outright hilarity. Like there's a lot of funny stuff in there. Yeah, I tend to find that movies that are dynamic in that way, that is the word I'd use.
There's this kind of like movie term I kind of have heard sort of more recently. I don't know if you've like heard of it. It's just I've been hearing some people kind of coin it, and it's kind of a type of movie called like the encyclopedic movie. And this would be like some people might say like the original one might be something like Birth of a Nation. And then, you know, a movie, Goodfellas would be an example that would fall. It's just a movie where it's kind of like, it's just a movie that's usually like somewhat long because it's also going to be very dense and it's just giving you like just tons and tons of information about the world that you're in, like just
Oh,
far
okay.
more than maybe older movies. Usually these are like more like JFK is kind of considered an encyclopedic one, where it's like, oh, you're just kind of throwing in like tons and tons of information. And they're, a lot of times like they're kind of like autobiography or just biographical stories, or a lot of times like they're crime stories. But in many ways, like Interview with the Vampire is very much kind of like an encyclopedic vampire movie, where they just kind of cover so many things, including like kind of like what vampires are and and just
Well, that was one of the interesting
experience of
things
it.
about it too. Is like, I know you have kind of like the classic rules of vampires, and this is, there's things like, vampires are afraid of garlic and things like that, and like early on it establishes kind of what are the myths of vampires versus what are kind of the realities, and it sort of lays out these new rules, I guess, early on in that interview.
Yeah, which I think is just always like a thing that's like really fun for a lot of the fans. Like I kind of enjoy whenever I kind of watch a new vampire movie, kind of seeing where they take the lore, what rules they kind of establish.
Yeah, right.
'Cause it's different for every movie. But they really go in depths with the Interview with the Vampire. Like, like they very quickly like shut down things like, crucifixes and garlic, but they're like, oh, but coffins are part of it,
Yeah, exactly.
And just even like the whole when Louis first becomes a vampire and he's talking about his old human body dying, and then seeing the new world with his vampire eyes, and everything's kind of a little bit different.
Yeah.
And like really neat little detailed stuff like that, which I'm sure is like, and that's the great thing about a book, is that I'm sure the book is even more detailed with these little things, but they had a lot of material.
I'd love to read it sometime.
Mm-hmm. If you want to know an interesting little detail about Interview with the Vampire, I'm not sure if you know this, but it kind of puts things a bit more in perspective, is the reason Anne Rice wrote the book was because her daughter, who was close to the age of Claudia, died in real life.
I had heard that.
And I believe she died from, it was actually like a blood-related disease. Is leukemia? Does leukemia? I know leukemia is like a cancer, but is that related as a blood disease? Maybe it might have been leukemia that the daughter died from.
Cancer of the blood.
Yeah, and which is partly why she went with the vampire premise. But essentially, it was almost just kind of like a comforting project for her to kind of bring back her kind of like dead daughter, in a fictional as a fictional character, where not only would she bring her back, but bring her back as a character who could never die, and also never grow up and be preserved as her daughter kind of forever.
It is interesting because there's that scene where there's that female vampire who kind of takes Claudia under her wing.
Who lost her daughter.
And then they end up burning in the well together.
Yeah. I mean, that very well could have been in a weird way, like maybe like Anne Rice's like own little kind of morbid fantasy of being like, oh, like I could be reunited with someone like my daughter, and then we just die together, and literally to the point that like they become dust. They become one solid chunk of dust. And that's also, God, that's such a great little scene when Louis, I mean, it's such a heartbreaking scene when he discovers them.
Yeah,
and he just kind of caresses her cheek as like the ashes just blow in his face. That's what I mean is like, it's like a very, they go for like a lot of sentimental, emotional things in that movie, as opposed to just trying to make them scary, one-dimensional vampires.
That's just it. And that's kind of what I mean by dynamic too, right? Is that it's got moments of sentimentality and sensitivity, and others that are totally horrific, and then moments that are more, adventurous or comedic or whatever. It's just got a broad spectrum of emotion and emotions that it kind of ties into.
Yeah, it's a very rich movie. That's why I say like it felt like a very Oscar type of movie, just with the way like they handle. I don't know if I'm not saying that was their goal, that they were like, oh, like let's like win some Oscars with this, but like it was just treated with the detail and care of like an actual historical period piece movie.
Yeah, totally.
Apparently, Brad Pitt hated the experience of making that movie.
Really?
He like apparently almost like wanted like out, but just contractually couldn't.
That's too bad.
But
Looks like it
yeah.
would have been fun to work on.
Yeah.
I feel like I would have had a blast doing
Well,
that.
I was always, I'm like, is there, because maybe he kind of recognized like the marketing of the like, oh, we're going to put Tom Cruise and Brad Pitt together in something, because they never really worked together since then.
Yeah.
But in many ways, they were kind of like the two big, you know, kind of hunky leading men at that particular time.
Yeah, totally.
So
they were like the biggest movie
Maybe
stars.
he felt he was being manipulated or kind of like.
Although
put into
he might not have been that big at that time.
Well, he wasn't. He hadn't been around nearly as long. He was almost kind of. If anything, you would almost think it would be more Tom Cruise feeling a bit threatened by Brad Pitt, because Brad Pitt was kind of like they were the same age more or less, but Brad Pitt was kind of like the new guy.
Yeah, I don't know if I don't think Tom Cruise would have felt threatened.
I mean,
because he's. I mean, he was so solidified as a movie star.
No, yeah, threatened is not the right word. I don't think Tom Cruise felt threatened, but he probably was at least aware that to a degree he probably was in somewhat of a competition career-wise with
didn't want to be
Pitt.
upstaged.
Yeah. I mean, maybe that's why Tom Cruise gives such a good performance, because he's just sort of like, I'm going to make sure I shine.
He was like, yeah, I got to like really perform here in front of my co-star competition sort of thing.
Yeah.
But well, anyway, on that note, I think we should wrap things up. It is now 3:33 a.m. and but we've covered our top 10. That was our episode on Gothic horror. We talked for longer than I expected that we would for it, but we got into quite a bit of stuff.
Yeah, we got like. We got into some Sesame Street rants.
We even went off onto some tangents about where the wild things are and stuff.
That's right. That was the other one.
That was good.
Yeah.
I mean, I like to go off on tangents sometimes.
Yeah.
Well, hopefully you all tolerated my hacking away and coughing nonstop. I'm going to go see a doctor tomorrow, and hopefully I'm not dying, but I sure feel like I am right now. Anyway.
I'll probably have this cough next week, so we'll pass it over.
We'll just keep it going.
Yeah.
Anyway, thank you for joining us, ladies and gentlemen. We hope you had as much fun and excitement as we did talking about all this stuff. This is Kevin Rosmer
and Oliver Drawson
signing off. Good night.